Morning, everyone. Welcome to the official local, excuse me, the local conference of youth on climate change in Botswana, the very first one, which is an event hosted under the umbrella of YOUNGO, which is the official youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's such a pleasure to see so many of you here, 33 and counting. We had nearly 400 people registered, so we're looking forward to hopefully getting most of them in the room, respecting that it is just after the holidays and people are just getting back to work or some are still on holidays. But thank you so much for making time to spend, well, making time and dedicating it to supporting and contributing to youth leadership on climate change in our beautiful country. Just a little bit of background on LCOY. As I shared, this is the first LCOY that's being hosted in Botswana. It's a local conference and they happen at three different levels. So we've got LCOY, which is the local one, which is national. Then we've got RCOY, which is regional, which would be looking at the Africa region. And then at the end of the year, we've got the Conference of Youth, which happens just before COP28, which is the big climate meeting conference of parties, which will be happening in Dubai in the UAE. And how we fit into the puzzle of the LCOY of the COYs, is that through the LCOY, we bring together young people from across the country, the cities, the villages, as many as we can get. And luckily, in the day of virtual meetings, we've also got Zoom, so we can get people. We had people as far as Khanzi registering. We've got people in Francetown. We've got people all around the country registering and joining to make their voices heard and to contribute to what will be the outcome document for our session, which will speak to what youth would like when it comes to support for climate action from private business, from government, and from civil society and multilateral bodies. And yeah, with that introduction, I'd like to invite those of you on the call. We've made it a meeting instead of a webinar so we can all interact. I'd like to invite those of you on the call to please check in. If you can share your name and where you are joining us from. Would be lovely to know the people in the room. Where in the country are you joining us from? And that will be our icebreaker, seeing where everyone is joining from. And then with that, to kick it off, because we do have a rather tight schedule, I would like to open it up to Christopher Seagateng, who will be joining us from the Pan-African Youth Union and the Botswana National Youth Council. Kick us off with a few encouraging words, and also as young people taking action on climate action and highlighting some of the work that they do at the Botswana National Youth Council to support climate action, given the context of Botswana, and respecting that we do have to deal with it, although we are not the biggest contributors to it. Christopher, are you here?
Thank you, Pato. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes, I take this opportunity to thank you for the invite, and also take this opportunity to thank all the members who are joining for this call. As already alluded, my name is Christopher Seagateng. I'm the Deputy Secretary General for the Pan-African Youth Union, which is the umbrella body for all the National Youth Council in Africa. I also serve as a board member for the Botswana National Youth Council. Today it's a great honor to be joining and to share about how we can enhance youth participation in climate action, particularly looking at because of the many events that has been happening, young people's participation in key decision platforms and issues has been put into the global agenda. And we know that Botswana is no exception, and we appreciate the work that has been done, even though, as Pat has already alluded, we have a long way to go. But I believe that the honors lie in us as young people, more so that we do have a role to play in making sure that we reach into that. I believe that the first point of entrance is that for us to be heard and make our voice count. Climate change is a problem we are all experiencing now. One way or the other, the damaging effects of climate change affect us at the end of the day, and it means that all of us are in this together. Whether we are young or our age differences, we still have some of the things that to do. And as young people in Botswana, we have to come together to understand that we have some problems to address and brainstorm potential solutions and make plans to put those solutions into action. It is often scary to see how a lot of things have been changing within our environment, from having wildfires to getting the change into the atmosphere, meaning that we cannot negate the effects that is happening of climate change. For us as young people, it is often said that learning is a continuous process. The more we learn about climate change, the more seriously we are going to take it, and the better you will be able to contribute to discussion on climate solutions. I recall vividly we started the conversation last year when we hosted a Bato in one of the platforms. We are speaking about uh, green jobs or jobs in the climate changes for young people to appreciate. And this is all becoming a learning curve to say there is a bit and chunk of everyone to say within the climate change, from gender to jobs to how you name it, and also rising global temperatures and extent of animal species. There is indeed a lot for every one of us to say. We also need to appreciate of embracing sustainability in our day-to-day life. I mean, we are never too young to change our own lifestyle for the better. Keeping things sustainable at home will make sure that we are empowered as young people and advocate for sustainability in our community and behind. Simple things such as riding your bicycle instead of taking a car, or using one car instead of all of us following each other, whereby we contribute to emissions that come from that. Simple things that we also learn from school, such as planting trees. We're not only making sure that we cut trees for firewood, but we also contribute to making sure that we plant trees. Recycling as well is one way of the simple things that we often overlook, but can contribute to that. And talking about climate change from one area to the other, or from one community to the other, or speaking about it within our friends. We also have this notion of saying, let's appreciate nature and spend time outdoors, because researching about climate change is key, but so is connecting with nature. It gives you the opportunity to look around and reflect into the beauty of nature, how it presents to you. There's no such thing as getting fulfillment in spreading the word. So as young people, we need to find ourselves as the spreading the gospel of having the good climate changes that we anticipate to see. In terms of what the work that we do, allow me to share what we do as the Pan-African Youth Union and how we can plug into these opportunities and the platforms that we are having as a union. We do have what we call the commissions. These commissions are carried in accordance with the provision of our statute, and commissions are focal organs responsible in the implementation of our Pan-African Youth Union program. One of the commissions that we have is the Environment and Climate Management Commission, which allows us that at the regional level, we are able to implement programs that are speaking to climate and young people themselves. And for one of our flagship program is the Green Leaders Academy, where it allows young activists across the African continent to apply and on board for 6 weeks module, where they can become learning from financing, negotiations, as well as having an opportunity to interact with their peers and share their resources, their work as well. And after that, we have a graduation and we onboard you into our database. It also allows you to apply for a small fee of grant that you can utilize to implement at your country level. We did graduate the first cohort this year. We are looking forward to launch the second cohort. So look out for the Pan-African Youth Union Green Leaders Academy, where you can apply for the oncoming cohort. You can reach out for this information from the Pan-African Youth Union Facebook page, or our platforms. You can also reach out through the platforms from Botswana National Youth Council. The other aspect of how we contribute is that we do appreciate that young people have a voice to say. And in one of our doing is that we appreciate that young people have a voice to say, and we engage them with relevant authorities such as ministers responsible for environment, or ministers responsible for ministers responsible for environment, and ministers responsible for people as well, for young people, I mean, as well. So we would want to appreciate that for that platforms, if they are around, make sure that you participate and take part into that as well. One would ask at country level, what are we doing, especially looking at we as the National Youth Council, we are the apex body for young people. We don't have much programs, but we are not turning a blind eye on climate action in Botswana. What we are doing is that through the grant that is being administered at the National Youth Council, we do invite relevant youth-led organization to apply for our grants. Our grants run annually per financial year for government. Sometimes we just allow different thematic areas to come on board and apply. Sometimes we zone it to 3 or 4 as per our strategy, but we do support those engagement. I would just name one of the our grantees that benefited from the grant that were into the space is the Botswana Wetlands, where they carried a 2-week program enhancing and supporting young people and the climate environment in the wetlands in Botswana. So those are some of the engagement that we do participate in. But other than that, we do take a part in to make sure that we also curate and collect voices for young people that we can contribute into engaging that. I would want to also add into saying that a lot of aspect that comes from engaging with young people is that more than ever now, we need a lot of young people to come on board and to take spaces into having conversations that are meaningful. Make sure that you look around your community, adopt one school and have that information sharing, adopt one group of young people and make sure that you share those element of it. And there are a lot of avenues that we can utilize into that. I mean, going into COP28, as Paco already alluded, there's a lot of opportunities that have been carried out. One, to get young people to accredit. Two, to get young people to be fully funded and supported. And what we do for young people to take it upon themselves to apply and participate into all these other platforms and make sure that their voices are being heard and also they're being able to share opportunities. And the other one is for us to collaborate. I do appreciate the conversation that is happening now. We can see an array of different youth organization or youth-led organization coming on board to say clearly we need to come on board and say, if I've got resource Y, you have resource X, or you've got a mobilizing a potential that we can leverage on, but also to say as individuals who we often sometimes see each other in different platforms and forums, it is high time now that we take that and make sure that we can come up with something at a national level and come on board and start asking relevant questions and also seeking for support from the government to do that. Allow me in closing to share some of the recommendations that we've recognized as the union that we feel that we can take forward. One of the things that we observed during our last Africa Climate Week is that there's a lack of effective integration in engagement of youth into government processes, which lead to engagement into regional and international avenues and platforms. We had this conversation the other day to say, how many young people are party to government of Botswana going to whether Africa Climate Week, whether to COP. So there's exclusion of young people into this government processes. So we need to fight and advocate to the point that a lot of us here are taken into these platforms. And a lot of us, before going to this meeting, we are convened and being able to contribute. Young person from Hanzi, young person from Gaborone, all these localities have a contribution to take. The other one is that there's little financial support for young people. It's still evident that young people struggle to participate in the regional platforms, even challenging that it is has to be supported by a country delegation to facilitate the common agenda. I bet we'll all agree that if you look around, few to none of our NGOs or organization or individual startups receive little to no funding in our country. And we also have an unconsolidated youth effort with a lot of passion from the youth. There's a number of duplicate initiatives, some addressing same agenda, but not coordinated to deliver a common impact. And there's a lack of trust and uniform mechanism to integrate youth action and aspiration. I was just sampling some of the outcomes and recommendations that were emanated from the Africa Climate Week as per young people's conversation. With that being said, I wish you all a successful 2 days, and I believe that the conversation and the engagement does not end here. This is only a startup of what we'll continue getting. And for all the other information that I was sharing on, you can look up for it from the Pan-African Youth Union website and social media platform, as well as the Botswana National Youth Council social media platform. Thank you so much. I submit.
Thank you so much, Mr. Christopher Christian Sahathing, on behalf of Pan-African Youth Union and the Botswana National Youth Council. Speaking to some of the points that you brought up, that's exactly why we had done, why we've now taken it upon ourselves as young people to host the local conference of youth. To go into the introduction again, so the local conference of youth in Botswana is hosted by 4 organizations: the youth-led Global Shapers Community Gaborone Hub, Sustain 267, which I'm a part of, Green Habitat Botswana, and the Botswana Climate Change Network. So 4 young people came together to try and address the exact challenges that Chris highlights, being consolidation of efforts, collaboration, and connecting as young people who are interested in the space, connecting as young people who wish to do something. We all know that alone we can do something, but together we can do something even bigger, especially with climate change being, the climate crisis being something that will definitely need all hands on deck and need them working together. And that has seen us convene today under the theme Enhancing Youth Leadership in Climate Action for Sustainable Development in Botswana. Just a little bit on our host, the Global Shapers, which is the lead host, is a part of the Global Shapers community, which is the youth initiative of the World Economic Forum, where young people from across the world and in their respective cities who are already doing amazing things in their individual capacities come together to do something for not only themselves, but for their communities. So from their diverse backgrounds, being citizens and just residents of Gaborone, and these are city-based hubs. And then Sustain 267, we are an organization that aims at advancing sustainable development through knowledge sharing, organizing, and mobilizing. Some of you will have attended some of our workshops, maybe the Road to COP ones, and you may have listened to the Sustain 267 podcast. And then there's also Green Habitat. Green Habitat is, I think, currently based in Maun. Those are our team that are in Maun, and they do a lot of work around biodiversity conservation in schools. And our big sister, if it had a gender, it would be our big sister, the Botswana Climate Change Network, which is a membership-based network which has done a lot of the hard work in terms of starting these conversations over the years, connecting NGOs, CBOs, research centers, and private entities, and we build on the foundation that they laid and have been laying for many years now. So those are the four organizations that have come together, each one represented by a young person. And some of our objectives, just so you have an idea of what we tried to achieve with this. Our three main objectives was to promote youth engagement in climate action. As we know, it is a challenge. It's not so easy to get into, even if someone has an appetite to get involved. It's not so obvious where to start. So we're looking to build capacity building and strengthening knowledge sharing and strengthening networks on collaboration. The second one was to have an output document that would speak to the demands of young people in Botswana, what kind of support they would like from private sector, public sector, multilateral bodies, and from civil society. Young people are ready to act. We can see that young people are already acting, but what kind of support would they need for us to be able to amplify that, for that to be able to be more material and for it to be more systematic. It's not always just fun. Sometimes it's a bit of mentoring. Sometimes it's helping to put certain structures in place. So we will have an output document for that. And then objective 3 is to try and bring more young people into the UNFCCC processes as probably one of the most important and powerful bodies in terms of climate action globally, where parties being governments are represented, civil society as observers. All of those people have power that they bring to that space, and making sure that we also harvest the power of young Botswana to not only be involved in these spaces, but be involved in a way that's material and that their voice is being heard. And we've had the privilege, the honor of having this event endorsed by the Ministry of Environment, Natural Resources and Tourism, which hopefully then means that we will be able to work together in the longer term to bring all of those together. So with that, to just give you, so far what we've been able to do, this is the final leg of this conference, the local conference of youth. Before we had 2 pre-consultations. We had the capacity building webinar in August, which was also half a day with experts in the rooms, helping us understand some of the terminology within the space, some of the landscape, some of what has been done up to date and where the gaps still are. So we spoke to agriculture, mitigation, adaptation, climate finance as well, to make sure that we're building capacity. And then on the 13th of September, we had the consultation, which was where we got young people to come in for almost 4 hours. We did breakout sessions where we gathered the opinions and voices of young people of what are your thoughts on this and what would you like, to make sure that our output document is representative of the young people that we say whose views we say we're consolidating. And today we've got the local conference of youth, which is virtual, people joining us from across the country. Please continue to check in. As you check in, share your name, the area of your profession as well, and where you are joining from. Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for joining us. Tserofatso, who's a civil engineer, thank you for joining us. Nongwazi, the animal scientist and graduate, please thank you for joining us. Please note that the session is also being live streamed on the Sustain 267 Facebook page if you would like to also share from there. With no further ado, that was quite a bit to say. I would now like to invite our next presenter, who is Dr. Claude Kapeba. He's the Executive Director at South African Resource Watch, and he'll be presenting to us on sustainable development as an extractive-dependent economy in the face of the climate crisis. And how this session came to be is that during our preparation, and even as we did our media interviews, whenever we spoke about climate change and the need to do something, the comment on how can we say we should do something when we still need to develop, how can we leave our resources on the ground when we still need them for our very survival? And hopefully Dr. Claude will be able to put this into context for us. Dr. Claude, are you there?
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Handing over to you. Hi, Claude.
Yes, no, thank you so
Okay.
much for the invitation. I'm quite humbled to be talking to the young people on this very important matter of climate change. I am Claude Kabemba, and I am the Executive Director of the Southern Africa Resource Watch. The Southern Africa Resource Watch is a regional organization that invests in the promotion of good governance of natural resources, with great focus on mining, hydrocarbon, forestry, and fisheries. We are based in Johannesburg with offices in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe. And we also work very much in Botswana, mostly looking at the diamond sector. So this, it's a very important gathering. I think the theme of enhanced youth leadership in climate action for sustainable development in Botswana comes at the right time, really few weeks before COP28. I think it's an important opportunity for young people, not just in Botswana, but across the continent, to start organizing and mobilizing and planning what action to take and what suggestion to take to COP. If it's not to COP, but how to engage with government, the private sector, and the multilateral partners on how to engage in the climate actions and ambitions. So I think we all know that climate change is a reality. I think we can't run away from it. It is upon us. If we don't fight back as a global community, I think this fight is not just for Botswana, it's not just for one country in isolation, but it's a fight as a country, as a region, as a continent, as a global community. If we don't do that, it's going to wipe the world as we know it. The numbers are there, the manifestation nature is manifesting itself against our lives. So climate change is increasing our vulnerability. We see it through drought, flooding, heat waves. And in a number of countries, there's land degradation, increasing food insecurity. We are seeing migration within the continent. That migration we see on the ocean, young people going to the West, to Europe. One reason is just there isn't an ability to cater for those young people due to the challenge of governance in Africa, but also to increasing threat from climate change. And that food insecurity, inability to create enough jobs, is pushing young people out of the continent. But we also have internal migration, people running away from droughts, going where there is enough water. We've seen a number of migration in Africa moving toward the Congo Basin, which is quite rich in terms of water. We are seeing the Lake Chad that is getting dry, and a movement of people looking for survival because of increasing climate change risks. So what you guys are organizing is very, we need to support and we need to appreciate it. So one important thing, because you are talking about sustainable development, every country, and including Botswana, must incorporate and systematically manage climate risks in development operations. So climate change interventions cannot be done in isolation from our development plan. So what he's being asked, and which we need to do, all of us, is to integrate our climate change action ambition into a development plan. And for that, Botswana has made commitment through the Paris Agreement. But just as many other countries on the continent, the challenge for most countries is how to address adaptation, because it's an incremental cost, not as isolated investment, but how do we systematically incorporate climate risks and opportunities into our policy planning, into our investment design, into our implementation plan, into our evaluation of our development outcomes. And I think that's where you start to link climate change ambitions with our development plan. So it has to be systematic. And the question that I think the youth, the young people need to ask is Botswana climate change plan integrated in the Botswana's development plan? And I think that's an important question, and a lot of work needs to be done to try to find out if that is done. So Botswana will have to integrate climate action into its core development agenda. Without that, you create some gaps, both in terms of the impact that you want to achieve and the development outcome. So Botswana must invest in and build. When you look at the Paris, the Botswana NDC, Botswana has agreed to a low carbon, climate resilient future. And that is an important commitment. And we need to look at both the policy, the institution, and the plan that Botswana have, if they're integrated, and if they have the capacity to produce the outcome that we need. As you know, my sense is that you all know that Botswana has an NDC, which he submitted his first NDC in 2016, and I hear Botswana is revising that, Botswana remain committed to a low carbon development strategy and supporting the necessary migration and adaptation activities in order to reduce vulnerability to climate change. And talking about vulnerability, as you know, Botswana is considered highly vulnerable to climate variability and change due to its high dependence on rain-fed agriculture and natural resources, high levels of poverty, particularly in rural areas. We talk a lot about Botswana exceptionalism as one of the best managed country on the continent, which has been able to manage its diamonds correctly, and a model that we all want to emulate. But the disparity in terms of development between rural and urban remain quite acute, and it posing a problem of risks and vulnerability against climate change, especially for rural communities. And there is a low adaptive capacity to deal with these expected changes. And that's where the capacity of the state to respond, the capacity of society to respond, and the capacity of the private sector to be part of it becomes important. And that's to question the ability, how Botswana develop its policy, how people participate in the development policies, how does these policies reflect people's ambition, people's expectation, people's options. And that's an important one, because climate change policies and ambition needs to be owned by the people. It's only when people own those, then there's a capacity built nationally to respond as a society to those climate threats. Then when you look at this vulnerability and you understand why Botswana is focused on 3 areas of work in its NDCs, at least the current one, it has been on water, agriculture. It has been mostly on water, I think, agriculture and health. Just exactly because of these are quite big challenges that are facing Botswana. So I think as Botswana revises NDC, I think young people need to question how far we've gone to implement the ambitions that we had in the 2016 NDCs as we revise it. And the young people need to be participating in the revision of these NDCs. I think it's an important participation, consultation it's a core activity of dealing with climate change risks. And young people need to present themselves to government that we want to be part of this process and we want to be considered as partner in this in creating a common future. So, but one important thing which I think you would like to hear from me is more about, but I think it's also important to just suggest that there are 3 documents that guide Botswana climate change, and that we have the second national communication, the NDC, the sustainable land management, and the national water master plan. But what I've picked up is that there is a gap in terms of policies in Botswana. There isn't a law on climate change, and there isn't an institution that is created just to deal and guide climate change work. And I think the legal and the institutional gap is quite big that needs to be resolved. So my argument is that Botswana needs to improve its climate governance system. While there are a number of legal documents that guide its implementation in climate change work, but it lacks the legal institutional framework that really focuses on climate change. And that needs to be resolved, but quite quickly. But one key sector that has not been included in the NDC, but which is an important sector for the economy of Botswana, is the mining sector. And we know that Botswana is a mining country. Its economy is supported by mining, especially diamond. But I want just to suggest that we know Botswana as a diamond country, but the country does not just produce diamond. I think the country produces a number of minerals, including nickel, copper, coal, soda ash, gold, graphite, silver. These are a number of minerals. But when it comes to climate change, we can pick up 3 minerals that are really interesting and that we need to monitor. These include nickel and copper. These 2 are very important in the manufacturing of green technology for the energy transition, for renewable energy. So we need to understand how much copper copper is one of the key metal in that goes into electrical cars, so it's a key element for the energy transition. And Botswana produces copper. We need to monitor how much Botswana is producing, who's buying Botswana copper, how is copper extracted in terms of respecting human rights, environmental rights, and protecting biodiversity. The young people need to follow, because there's no need to produce and leave environmental negative impact in society. But we are exporting copper, we are exporting nickel. So I'm just linking the renewable energy, the energy transition, that Botswana is also a key contributor to the manufacturing to the production of key minerals that are important for the manufacturing of green technology. So that is one part. The second part is coal. You know, coal is one of the considered as one of the biggest polluter that contribute to most of the eating up of the atmosphere. And countries have been asked to abandon coal as a source of energy. And you know that Botswana produces coal, which powers some of his power stations in Botswana, but coal is also exported to South Africa, to Zimbabwe, and to Namibia. And Botswana is planning to expand its coal production at its Marupe coal mine to be exported to the EU. As you know, the EU is facing serious energy challenge since the Russia-Ukraine war, and they are sourcing coal from around the world, and Botswana has been identified as a source of coal. Now, the question that arises from that, considering the challenge that we are facing with climate change, and we need to move from high carbon economy to zero carbon economy by abandoning fossil fuels, which will include coal, oil, and so on. Should we, and that's a question the young people need to ask, should Botswana continue to extract coal? Is it important for the economy of Botswana? Is it important for the protection of the world? That question becomes important because the Botswana government argues that we cannot leave important minerals that can build our economy underground. And when there is a need, a source, people want coal in Europe, people want coal in India, people want coal in China. Why should Botswana stop extracting, exporting this coal if it can help grow the economy? But the question we need to ask, what is it right? Is it important? What are the challenges and the opportunities for that? And I think it's a question that the youth, the young people needs to engage government and to find that as a nation, to speak with one voice on what the interest of Botswana, the interest of the continent, but also the interest of the world is. But you have to understand that the Botswana government position on coal seems to be a position also from the African Union, which have said the world needs to give Africa space, not to leave resources underground, but to use these resources to expand, to build the economy. And the argument that has been used is that Africa does not pollute much. We have not contributed much to the pollution and to heating of the atmosphere, even to the climate change. Why don't you allow us to extract our resources and to benefit from it for some times? So that's an argument that I put forward on the table for the young people to respond to. And that coal is also a problem around communities where it's extracted. I think we need to invest as young people in understanding the impact of coal on mining communities, on the environment, and on biodiversity. A lot of work needs to be done. We need to have evidence. We need to do a lot of studies with evidence that we can present to government, to mining companies, that this is the impact that coal is having on our community and ourselves, despite the fact that it's bringing revenues, but it's also damaging the environment. And the cost of coal impact on environment need to be calculated, because we might collect revenues, but that revenues might not be enough to restore the damage that the extraction of coal is causing on the environment. So the cost benefits analysis of extracting coal in Botswana needs to be done. Is it worth it or it's not? Can Botswana support other sectors of the economy, expand them, than producing coal? So that is a question I think that needs to be engaged in, and with government, with everybody. On the other side, we need to say, how do we benefit from our copper, and how do we benefit from nickel as key minerals that are important for sustaining the energy transition? And I hear Botswana is attracting a lot of Chinese companies. And really, we need to hold corporate to account. We cannot simply look at the revenue that we are collecting. We need also to look at how these companies are behaving in terms of their corporate citizenship. And that is the work that young people need to engage in. So just to end, I know I had 20 minutes. There are gaps that I think young people, as they engage in this climate work, they will need to look at. And I want to put them at 3 levels. The first one, I spoke to it, is a gap around institutional gaps. You need to look at the climate, the institution that are set up in Botswana to deal with climate change. I think those institutions need to be clear, capacitated, and able to respond to the climate change challenges. The second gap is around data. Most of the time, we don't have data to provide correct intervention, either around agriculture, either around health, around water. But here, especially in the mining sector, we need to start to push government to create an opportunity to start collecting data on the mining sector. As you know, mining is one of the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas. So the mining sector in Botswana need to decarbonize. As we produce copper, we produce diamonds, we produce all these minerals. They are producing under very high energy intensity. So the mining sector need to decarbonize. Does the Botswana government has a policy on the decarbonization of the mining sector? If they don't, we need to work to push government to have a policy that guide companies to decarbonize the entire value chain of production. But we know that mining companies, a company big like De Beers, should have a climate change policy, which allows it to start decarbonizing its activities across the value chain. But we need a government policy. And that policy allows us then to start collecting data and closing the information gap. And finally, it's around, I think, we need to understand the risks and the impact of climate change on society. And I think we need, as a young group, young people, to have an opportunity to do analysis of what is happening around our communities and use those information gathering and data to engage government and to secure a much more coherent communication with government based on evidence that we collect around our communities. Thank you so much. I'll stop there. I think I've exhausted my 20 minutes.
Thank you so much, Claude. Really insightful, and it pokes at a couple of things that we need to think about, especially as an extractives dependent economy. Just want, if anyone has any questions or comments for Claude, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we will ask them. So when we speak to, you spoke of the challenge of development versus, well, not versus, because we do often make it a versus. My first question is it a versus, either your extractives or development? How do we ensure that the two coexist and, on top of coexisting, serve the country?
That.
So so far we look at it's either development, or we look at it as either development or extractives. So the same way that you highlighted that coal has its downsides, although it has its positives. What role would you see youth playing in marrying those two together? And is it really a conversation of extractives or development, or can we make it extractives and development?
That is a it's a brilliant question. I think one, you need to create a space for engagement with government, where government clearly articulates its position. And that position of government of Botswana on, for example, coal extraction and development argument cannot be done in isolation with what is happening around the world. It has to be part of the bigger global commitment to reducing carbon emission. But the issue of development is also important. But is it true that if we don't extract coal, we will not develop? Or is it also true that we need coal to develop? Those are, I can't provide a pathway for that, but I think as a society, Botswana, the young people need to engage government, putting on the table some of the risks and the impact of coal production on society, on nature, and on climate change. And also do a cost analysis with what Botswana is going to gain from extracting coal in terms of development. Where does the opportunity lies? Where's the biggest opportunity for Botswana to move forward? And I think that is a society needs to resolve it. It's a question that Botswana will not deal with alone. South Africa is struggling with the same question around coal. As you know, coal is the biggest source of energy for South Africa. 90% of South African energy, electricity, is produced by coal. South Africa is under pressure to abandon coal, but there is a debate here in South Africa. The society divided, the government itself is divided on how to deal with coal. So it's a question that I'll throw it back to the Botswana society, to the young people, to engage government in an open and frank discussion, and a society to have one voice that we present to the world, that either we don't want coal because of its impact on climate change and on biodiversity, on environment, or we go with coal because this is what we think will help us sustain our development. And that is Botswana's position. That is Botswana's decision. And that cannot be just a government decision. It has to be a government decision arrived at in consultation with the Botswana people, and the youth has to be part of it.
And thanks for that, Claude. Although you did really just throw back our question at us, if you're on the call and you'd like to chime in on that, please share in the chat, or feel free to put your hand up and unmute yourself. We've got a question here from Junior Sindisomo Sotwani. And Junior speaks to that when opportunities for research arise, will young people be allowed to take up such opportunities? So from the question, what I'm getting is that there's a monopoly of the older generation, and more experienced people are monopolizing the research space. And perhaps how can young people then get into that space? Looking at, we do need the guidance, but we also need the door open to some degree, which will then allow for, like you said, that engagement with government.
It's an important question. And one of the challenges that we are facing, not just in Botswana, across the continent, is a lack of research, evidence-based research that really help us to take correct decisions. And I think we need to open doors around our universities, research centers. We need to create think tanks. We need to create partnerships between young youth think tank institution with academia. I think the young people need to deliberately take action to go to think tanks, universities, to create synergy and partnerships for some of the ideas they have to be turned into a research work. And the same can be done in terms of universities. because most of these young institutions and organizations that we have brought together today are very much on the ground with communities and so on. And universities can rely on these institutions to collect data and to do the analysis. And the university, there is no way the university can create knowledge, new knowledge, without data from the ground. And the partnerships between academia and the young people's organization, think tank, and NGOs and civil society organization could be a very innovative way of bringing young people to become part of the research system in Botswana. But government can deliberately also create space to fund young people's research activities, where they collect the data continuously in communities. That data is brought into government system to help government take decisions in terms of where they should be intervening. Government cannot take a decision by declaration. It has to be based on data, evidence that is coming from the ground. And young people can be that door that link government to those evidence, but also academia could be using these young people as an opportunity to collect data that they analyze, that feed government, department and ministries to allow them to take decision on the informed basis. So I'm not talking about partnerships, synergies between different institutions, academia, young people, government, academia, young people, and the private sector can also help support young people initiatives. That is very important. And young people needs to be driven needs to be dynamic, needs to create ideas. And when you've got ideas, you go knock doors and present them. I think you always find an opportunity that can support you.
Thanks, Lord. And then the very, very last one before I let you go, I think it also speaks to what you said about collaboration and government being an enabler versus a boulder, so to speak, to stop development. A question comment from Monsu says, environmental preservation versus economic advancement, what are the alternatives? Question mark. Institutional gaps. How do we best develop a framework that is all-encompassing when experiences and adaptive strategies of communities differ? We have NCCs but that does not speak to development of laws or specific policies. To a certain extent, research does not exist, but institutional silos create red tape. So environmental preservation versus economic advancement, how do we balance the two? I think it speaks a bit to the one that you were just answering now. And institutional gaps. How do we develop a framework that is all-encompassing and accommodates the different people's vulnerabilities and adaptive capacities?
Those are brilliant questions. I think the first one, environmental advancement, environmental preservation, economic advancement, they are not exclusive. You cannot achieve one without another. You cannot achieve economic advancement by destroying the environment. That does not happen. If you see such a policy, it's a wrong policy. The two have to be in sync: environmental protection and economic advancement. The two are together, bind together. Anything that tells you that we want economic advancement against environmental issues, it's a wrong policy. Environmental advancement protection needs to be in sync with economic development. When you destroy the environment, you are delaying the collapse of society. So that have to be quite clear. On the institutional gaps, I think there is really need to create strong institutions, both at state level, but also at society level. Independent institutions that invest in knowledge creation. And that, as I said, it's something that government can deliberately, if it needs to know that it's important to have institutions that support its decision-making and its policy-making. And government can set up within institutions, academic institution, college, some independent institutions. But also, as I said, it's also the responsibility of the private sector to support the creation of institutions. And these institutions can have their agenda, but they cannot work in silos. There's always create synergy between different institutions to ensure that they all drive to supporting the national agenda. And you can't create an institution, a research institution in a vacuum. That does not contribute to the national agenda. And as we think about research institution, they have to be research that respond to the national agenda. Any research that is in a vacuum that does not support national agenda is not necessary, is not wanted. So that is the young people can create ideas and propose to government, propose to private sector, or go to university, set up a think tank at universities and benefit from university budget to run those type of think tanks. So my sense is that the institutions that we create have to be responding to the development agenda of the country and not otherwise. Thank you. Pato.
Thanks, Claude. And I think with that one, well, we've got, I don't know how much time, do you have time for one more question? Or no?
I've got my next meeting waiting for me.
You did say. So I guess this one we can discuss because we'll now be opening up to for a quick discussion. Any final words from Southern Africa Resource Watch for young people as we strive for sustainable development and pushing for climate action? Do you have any closing words?
I think my closing word is that this is a great event. It's a great we need young people to be part of every solution. We need young people's voice. Any solution, any pathway that does not include young people's voice is got no future. It's going to collapse. So we need young people to own those policies. We need young people to identify themselves with those government policies, for those policies to have a life. And to have a possibility to be implemented, because we need young people to own them and to support government, to support private sector implementation of those policies. So congratulations once again to the Botswana young people.
Dr. Claude Kabemba, thank you so much for making time to join us today. We will definitely be in touch. And the NDCs that that Claude mentioned, we will be sharing a document with all of those documents. Earlier, Christopher Seagateng mentioned, he spoke to a few opportunities that they have at the Pan-African Youth Union. We'll also be sharing that with the rest of the team. Follow the hosts on social media and all of that will be available there. So now for the next 15 minutes, because as we said, this is an interactive session, we'll be on the back of the presentation that we just had and looking at our theme, which we're going to share in the chat, enhancing youth leadership and climate action for sustainable development in Botswana. What would that look like for you? Please feel free to put your hand up and speak to this. As someone who's on the call, as someone who just sat through that presentation, when we say enhancing youth leadership and climate action for sustainable development in Botswana, practically, what does that look like for you? What would you like to see as a young person on the back of the presentation that was done now that shared that it's not an either or when it comes to development. It's not either we get development or we get to protect the environment. It's more of both must happen. If we're going to have development, we're going to need to also have certain environmental protections. And then while we wait for chats and for people to put their hands up, after I read this message, if we don't have someone's hand up, unfortunately for those who I know, I may end up volunteering one of you to share your thoughts. We're trying to keep this to about 10 minutes. So a question, I think, comment from Muthusi Sikomba in the chat. For as long as climate action is concerned, it is also important to have impact matrix at national level, contributing to the national NDCs and UN SDGs. NDCs, we've been using that word quite often. I'm not sure if everyone knows what it stands for, but NDCs are the nationally determined contributions. Last year, the revised ones were due. Botswana, we haven't yet submitted ours, but you can look at the first ones that we submitted while government looks to finalize the next set. Going back to the text, at national level, so metrics at national level contributing to the national NDCs and UN SDGs. So is there a way that we can measure the real impact of organizations in society and environment besides CSR and ESG? This would be a great question for some of our environmental impact assessment professionals. And tomorrow we've got a presentation on just transitions, and it will speak to some of what's been spoken to today, but also what came up yesterday of how do we move from where we are to develop better. Junior Sindiso Mosotwane, may I invite you to make your comment verbally? Okay, but while we wait for Junior or whoever will want to make a comment, Junior's comment is, like the UN Youth Parliament, Botswana needs a youth.
Yes, I'm here.
Please go ahead, Junior.
So saying like there's the UN Model Parliament, right? So I was saying maybe we should also have our own youth climate change parliament that will stand against whatever is already available and try to not have a monopoly anymore. So we need a challenge. There needs to be a challenge between what is available and what we can bring to the table. That is what I was saying. Thank you.
Wait, sorry, I don't think I quite understand the part on challenge.
So in this case, we already have organizations that are trying to deal with climate change, but it seems like they are not doing enough already. So instead of having only that monopoly, we need to bring something else to the table that we as the youth think will be the better alternative to what is already available. Does that make sense?
Yes, so us taking action to present what those alternatives would be. And I think that this is the perfect platform for that. Definitely agree with you, Junior. Do we have any comments or questions? What would sustainable development for youth-led climate action for sustainable development in Botswana look like for you? Kevin Roai from Green Habitat, I'm going to pick on you. Are you able to join us?
Hi, Pato. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, please go ahead. You've been one of the young people who've led when it comes to youth in climate action in the country, and what would sustainable development look like for you?
Thank you for the platform. I think one thing I would like to say, especially for the youth in my country, is that we need a coalition. We understand we have different organizations that are working on climate change, climate education, biodiversity conservation and stuff like that. But we do this probably in silos, and our efforts are hardly recognized. I always give an example that um, there's a bit of background noise somewhere. I don't know what's happening. Yeah, all right, thank you.
Sorry about
So,
that.
yeah, being in the climate space for a while right now, I've actually realized that in Botswana, there's a huge lack. There's a huge lack of information availability. There's also a huge lack of actually youth collaborating in issues of climate change. It's like we always want to work in silos and we always want to be, shining there on the spotlight. But climate change is not a one-man show. It's collective efforts trying to address different issues. And climate change is a really broad spectrum, which has a lot of issues that need to be tackled, from socioeconomy, from environment, from education, policies, and stuff like that. So it won't be possible if only a few people are on the bandwagon. We need to bring everybody on board, have that inclusive decision making from youth, women, disabled groups, vulnerable groups, local communities that don't have access to most of this information. And I think you would agree with me, Pato. It's a conversation we had before that we need to come together and do this. And from the previous speaker, I think Mr. Mosotwani, we agree with you that we need also a wing that acts as an intermediary, or acts as an advisor to the decision makers, that as the youth, this is what's happening on the ground. Work with us, let us advise you, let us also share in terms of research studies that we have done to show the impacts and the effects of climate change on the ground. So I'd really, really be happy to actually know that we have so many Botswana who are willing to jump into the bandwagon and also address issues of climate change. But we can't do it in silos. We need to come together. We need more of these forums to discuss, not only for the LCOY. You can do this as probably quarterly, or we can do this every year to actually meet and discuss and give reports to the decision makers that this is what's happening on the ground, and we have the facts here, and we willing to come in and help. So from our side, as Botswana, it's high time, because I know we're still skeptical about if climate change is here or not. So it's high time we agree and address the issues at hand. If we look, for example, the past 3 months, we've been having crazy and wild wildfires out there in the Chobe region. The whole CKGR burnt to completely 75%. We're having the Heartland district, also the Southern district burning. So these are the issues we still need to be addressing. When a car would come, the Department of Forestry is here to ask for the youth to actually run and put out these fires. These are fires that are serious, and they can impact not only the socioeconomy, our tourism as well, which we really based on. So it's actually a call for help for Botswana to say, let's come together and address issues of climate change together. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, Kevin. And then in the chat, we've got a few more comments. Definitely agree with you. Also, as young people, committing beyond just the conversation, but action. And if there's anything that I've seen when it comes to the LCOY is that young people are not only willing, they already, if you call them, they will come to the table. I think up to now, we've probably had up to we've probably engaged over 400 young people through the platforms and through the platforms. But looking at the comments, and then we'll be continuing with our program. Junior Sindis, okay. Bagang agreed with that there is power in showing up as a unit. Tinaya's comment, for me, it looks like collaborating on climate action interventions for youth, by youth, not to brag, but as we're seeing with LCOY. And then a comment from Elaine Libani, I think organizations such as the Global Shapers and others can come up with a framework that can help us monitor the progress. If we start at a community level, we may be able to make a little bit of progress. Also, a bit of collaboration would go a long way. It would be a personal responsibility to make our country sustainable. So perhaps starting to put in place some of those alternative frameworks that we wish we had in place. If Global Shapers has the capacity to put together a program or put forward a program to government or existing bodies to say, this is what we see as a solution, and then they just have to implement it, also speaks to being proactive as young people. Comment from Tshepiso Mesilonyane, I completely agree. The youth constituency on climate change in Botswana needs to be institutionalized. Young people are doing incredible climate work, both on advocacy and grassroots action. But for this to be sustainable and lead to actual progressive action, an institutional youth constituency is necessary to pool and direct resources and help define and strengthen the youth voice on climate change. Very powerful statement by Tshepiso there. Again, we will be sharing the information of some of the existing bodies such as the Botswana National Youth Council and the Pan-African Youth Union, so that as we look to make something new, we also acknowledge the old and the existing structures and not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Last comment from the Batso, and then we go on to the session that will speak to energy in Botswana. The Batso?
Hello, everybody.
Hi, the Batso.
Thank you for the platform. Speaking of youth, I'm wondering if you guys are aware that there's actually an initiative pushing to add to the Sustainable Development Goals, the 18th goal, called Youth Equity.
I am not aware of it. But please,
yeah, that is something, as young people, that is something that we need to be aware of. There's a website that you can check. I will definitely share the link on the platform. We need to know where we are going as young people. It's very, very important to collaborate. We need to understand that we are not in competition. I'll share the link and we'll definitely find a way of collaborating. This working in silos is not taking us anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Dabato. Sorry, I was on my phone taking notes as you were speaking. I didn't realize my video was on. And then from Israel, there's a communication barrier between the people and scientists. Perhaps we should consider the technology of translation to allow everyone to interact in their own language, definitely making it more accessible. Robert Hanna, are you with us? Robert?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Pato. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I can hear you loud and clear. I have to apologize. I'm on my phone, guys, because the timing has been changed. So I'm trying to do this live from my phone at the moment. So, but very happy to be here and join you today. Look good to see your happy smiley face. So really looking forward to participating and contributing, and it's great to see you got so many participants. You know, it's fantastic. So congratulations everybody who's made time today to take part in this important event. It's always been a key message from my point of view about we need to get more young people involved in the climate agenda. As you probably can see from my photograph, I'm an aging Madala. And I just want to make an apology to all the young people on the call today that our generation has completely failed you. And in terms of climate change, we have completely failed. And we really are passing over a very difficult baton for you guys to pick up and take forward to help save our species and this wonderful planet we all live on. So in my latter life, I'm very pleased to be able to say that I'm doing my bit in terms of contribution, in terms of reducing my carbon footprint, my whole lifetime carbon footprint. I'm pleased to say will be completely offset. But it's all for all of us really as individuals to take part in this difficult global journey that's happening for everybody on this planet. So it's a very important, number one importance from my point of view. But if I can kick off straight away, if that's okay. I have sent Butamel, I have sent you a copy of a video which I'd like you to play at some stage, because I don't have access to the Zoom facility to enable me to do that. As I said, I'm doing it from my phone. But my name is Robert Hanna. As you can see, I'm a director of a company called Sustainable Energy Botswana. We're Botswana's leading solar PV developer. And I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute. We were originally set up by Eunice Mtebedzi, who happens to be my partner. She set up African Sun Energy in 2020. We started with 3 employees. We now have 23 employees. We're now operating in 3 countries, including Malawi, Zambia, and Botswana. But Botswana is by far our biggest footprint. We are a design, build, finance, and operate company. So we don't sell solar equipment. We actually build power plants. And just to give you a quick overview of what we've done this year in Botswana, we're very active in the utility space. You may be aware that Botswana is about to commission 2 new utility scale projects, which we've done or been involved with, helping the owner of the project, Sturdy. 1 megawatt project, which is grid connected, supplied to the BPC grid in Shikawe, and a 3 megawatt project, which actually I think the president's hopefully visiting tomorrow in Bobanong or near Bobanong, which is a 3 megawatt project, which is going to be injecting clean energy into the grid. And it's probably worth pointing at this stage, and I'm a great fan of Botswana, but Botswana has a very flattering credibility in terms of its energy production. It is, in fact, the #1 country in the world for producing electricity from coal. And, that's a very embarrassing award, if you like, or recognition. And it's something that we need to do something about. The government's still very, very committed to coal. That is changing, and I'll speak a bit about that in a minute. But as you probably all know on this call, and if you don't know, I'm going to tell you, the largest contributor of CO2 into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change globally, is the energy sector. And a part of that energy sector, the production of electricity, is the single largest. And we in Botswana, as I just said, are the #1 country in the world for producing electricity from coal. And yet you are blessed. God gave you the sun, and you have the 5th best solar potential in the world. So in a way, the sun will be there long after the coal and diamonds, and we really need to get our head out of the ground and look to the sky to start exploiting this very beneficial energy source that you've been given in Botswana, and take advantage of it and start exporting kilowatt hours to our neighboring countries, because the Southern African region as a whole has an energy deficit of about 6,000 megawatts. It's a huge potential energy off-taker. And all the countries around us are suffering badly. South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, all these countries are suffering with power outages, and we don't need to be. This is a very fixable problem if we give up on the coal and start moving to renewables in its broadest sense. So just to give you, as I was saying, a quick overview of what we've done. I mentioned the 2 utility scale projects. We're also building a number of commercial industrial projects. We've done the first solar school in Botswana. We just built the first solar hospital in Botswana. Manufacturing companies. There's a whole range of climate change, and it's being driven very much by 2 things. First of all, the cost of energy has come down significantly for solar. It's now the cheapest electricity on the planet. It's readily available. It's a very simple technology to install, very straightforward. Requires lots of skill sets, but those are trainable. People can be things are achievable. So we, as I said earlier, are employing about 23 people at this moment. Half of them, I should say, are women. We've got lots of women engineers and directors in the company who are managing our efforts. So, but one of the key things we have to recognize is also the government of Botswana committed to the Paris Agreement and signed the NDCs, the offset, the 15% reduction in climate change. You need to make sure the government is accountable for those. And in the energy sector, every project that is introducing solar is obviously contributing to the reduction of that climate commitment. So we should ask government to account for and report not just to the globe and to the UN and the other agencies that are holding them accountable, but also to the people here in the country, so that we understand how the government is working towards delivering promise. I can say from a positive news that the government, you may be aware, published its budget in April, and as part of that, Peggy announced a 30% increase in renewables, and that was significant. So that is a huge congratulations to the government of Botswana, which is obviously now embarking on its clean energy transition from the world's #1 coal-dependent country to introducing renewable into its energy, and that has happened. So the two projects I mentioned earlier, there's a new 50 megawatt project being commissioned in Silibipikwe. They've announced a 100 megawatt project in Jwanging, but it's still a long way to go. Botswana needs about 600 megawatts of power a day. It's producing that, as I said, mainly from its coal-fired power stations at Malapoli, but also they're importing energy from South Africa still at the times of shortages because of maintenance of power centers in Malapoli. So they need to get that energy mix sorted out and reduce their deficit, the country's deficit in terms of purchasing power, which they're buying from South Africa at huge expense and then selling it to us at subsidized. And I should say that we have the lowest electricity tariff in the region. I mean, it's just crazy cheap. All the other countries that I mentioned that we're looking in, it's almost twice the price, more realistic price cost of energy. So the government is still subsidizing fossil fuels hugely. And that's not just Botswana. I mean, that's governments all over the world that really need to account. And as I said at the very beginning of my presentation, that, I feel really embarrassed that, in my lifetime, we haven't been able to sort this out. We're still pumping oil, we're still burning coal and gas, which is not alleviated. This can be fixed relatively quickly. And if we do fix it quickly, we could possibly, and I say possibly, stay on the 1.5 degree increase, which even at that temperature is unacceptable. And I think, we all know who live in Botswana, that we're experiencing droughts and a whole range of other things directly related to human-induced climate change. So, what I want to say is basically we are on a journey. Botswana started, we've been very slow. There's a huge economic opportunity for the country to see energy as a resource that it can export, creating jobs and increasing revenue and diversifying the economy from mining. I mean, it's the more diversity, the better. There is skills gap. We're working very closely with UB. We've had 12 UB students this year and BU students working on apprenticeships with us over the summer or the winter holiday period. We're very happy to have that work, and those students have been excellent. So these things can be fixed. But as a whole, Botswana should be taking the lead in SADC. It has an enviable reputation that other countries would love to have. And this is one of the bad news stories that the teacher sends home, that needs to do better, definitely in the energy sector. But the good news, of course, is globally transition is happening. This year, the energy expansion on budget will be about $1.8 trillion, and about half of that will be on solar and wind. So there's no doubt about it that globally the transition is happening, and you and I are living in an era where historically people will talk about in 100 years' time. The brink between the fossil fuel era and the new clean technology era. is happening right now as we speak, and we jump on that train and carry on and get on with it and benefit from that, or we still think we should hang on to the coal resources and there's a future in that and be left behind, and we will be. For me, it feels a bit like trying to reinvent the typewriter. We're hanging on to old technology here and say, look, there's still a place for a typewriter. We all know, who knows what a typewriter is? It's gone, it's history. And the same with coal-fired technology. It is history. It should, the quicker bind to the museum, the better. Anyway, if I can stop there maybe and take questions or any further comments from anybody, that'd be great.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks for, I think, laying the land a bit for us and helping us appreciate that a bit better. I'll start with the questions in the chat, and then I'll add on to them from my end. So one from Matla Morokoto. What are current active disadvantages of solar energy, apart from the cost, seeing as it is the most preferable? What are we as Botswana doing towards, I think, addressing those disadvantages? And then the second one that we've got is, it's a good thing we already started addressing the skills gap. The next step should be targeted at initiatives that resonate with communities. So I think in balancing the conversation as well, we do hear a lot of good things about solar. It is the best thing after sliced bread. But what are the other disadvantages of it? What would the hesitations be? Because if we look at the uptake right now, like you said, it's rather slow for something that looks like the perfect solution for energy, for addressing energy poverty or just access to affordable energy. Robert?
Yeah.
If anyone else has a question, please feel free to pop it in the chat, or you can put your hand up and speak to Robert directly. Sorry, over to you, Robert.
Yeah. Well, no problem. Well, let me address the disadvantages. Well, there are disadvantages. The first thing, it doesn't produce energy when the sun isn't shining. So at nighttime, you're going to get anything from your solar system. So you have to store that power. So you have to design a system that collects the energy during the day, utilize what you need, and then it puts the surplus into batteries or other storage systems for you to utilize after the sun goes down. And that costs money. But let me just give you some quick numbers. So solar today, you can sell for 8 US cents per kilowatt hour. That's what you can buy it for, that price. You will buy your BPC for roughly the same equivalent tariff. If you go into a diesel genset, you're now going to pay about 42 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour. So it's a very expensive form of energy using a diesel genset. A solar and battery system will cost you around about 22 US cents per kilowatt hour. So it's cheaper than diesel, but it's more expensive than solar during the day, and it's definitely cheaper than more expensive, than having BPC at its current tariff rate. So the ideal scenario for anybody considering a transition is to have what they call a hybrid system, which is a mix between solar and the grid as your first option. So you use solar during the day and then you use your grid power at night. If you have load shedding or the risk of load shedding, or you need energy security in the event of load shedding, then you would have a small battery system. And many of our clients do have, residential clients have small battery systems to provide 6 or 7 hours of power when the power is down. But that does almost double the cost of your installation. So obviously that's one of the downsides, is that it's only available during the daytime. So another thing's obviously that like every other man-made material, it uses resources: aluminium for the frame, glass for the module frames, the silicon for the PV bits of it, wire, copper, silver, gold, all kinds of rare earth metals go into PV modules, which are getting more and more efficient. And that's a problem. Getting hold of those materials, even though silicon's very, very readily available and won't be in short supply in any near-term future, long-term it isn't. And as yet, nobody's been thinking about the recycling of these materials so a PV module will last you 30 years, minimum 30-year production, possibly even 40. But even at that period, you have to think about how you're going to recover those minerals and reuse them, recycle them, or whatever. And then, as I said, the battery technology is just the same as you use in your phone, and has a very much shorter lifespan, 8 to 10 years. You have to think about recovering those materials. They're obviously not as hazardous as some other technologies, lead acid, for instance, other technologies. But you have to think about the whole cycling of the product life. And there's no doubt about it, solar technology uses materials and raw materials which have to be recovered. So those are the downsides, really. As I said, cost-wise, now it is now the cheapest form of electricity on the planet. There's no doubt about that, and that's the uptake. And I must say that the commercial uptake in Botswana is quite rapid. So there are a lot of commercial companies and businesses are adopting solar because it will save them money on their energy costs and provide that energy security during the daytime. Somebody's got the house up.
My connection was a bit patchy. Bako Muntiwa, please go ahead. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Good morning.
Yes, as we acknowledge solar and switching off to solar from coal, we also have a bit of downside on the other things for the masses. All I wanted to ask you, looking at Botswana consumptions in cola and Botswana ranking the 69th in the world for coal consumption, I wanted to ask you about affordability. If some of the villages or not all of the villages in Botswana are considered poor, what makes you think they will be able to switch that fast from using the normal coal to solar? Then consumptions per continent, Africa wasn't that ranking in the consumption per continent and the usage of coal, and the GDP per capita per person in Botswana is amongst the lowest in our other countries. Then if we all rank how much can one get using the USD, you find that it will be more costly for one to switch right now in Botswana to try use solar. How can you mitigate between that cost of switching, then staying up using the solar energy?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Thank you very much indeed. Let me try and address those multiple questions for you. But globally, we use the energy world uses something called a levelized cost of energy, which looks at the total cost, the life cycle cost, transmission costs, everything. So if you look at the levelized cost of coal compared to solar, coal is over $1 per kilowatt hour, because you've got the extraction of the material, costs money to dig it up. You then have to burn it. You then have to dispose of the fly ash. You have to maintain the coal furnaces, which often break down, as you know. And they have a 20, 30 year lifespan before you have to replace the burners and the coal plant. So if you look at that total cost of energy, coal is three times more expensive than solar today. 3 times more expensive. So that's the first thing to say. Second thing is that unlike solar, you build large coal plants in the center of the country like we have in Botswana, and then you have to build massive lines to take that power all around the country, and that is horrendously expensive and unsightly, but for all kinds of reasons. Transmission line, this is old technology, a central power point, which then distributes the power through power lines all through the country. First of all, you're going to get losses. So if you put 100 kilowatts of power in at Malapololi, by the time it gets to Francistown, it's now 60, 70 kilowatts. You've lost a lot of the power, or not a percentage of the power, 10 to 12% in the transmission alone. So first of all, you've lost energy. Secondly, the cost of putting in transmission line to villages in remote areas of Botswana just does not make any sense, because you will not have the off-takers, the 100 or 1,000 people, living in a small village in the Kalahari region or up in the northwest or wherever out in the central district. Putting in power lines to those villages doesn't make any sense at all, because solar you can literally build in the village. You can build the power station in the village, and you can move the power around in different ways. So we've been working with a community called Jamataka, which is halfway between Francistown and Ovapa. It was an off-grid village when we started. We built a power station there, and we're transporting the power within the community using battery technology. So what happens is the villagers charge their batteries in the morning, just like you do with your gas bottle. You buy an empty gas bottle, you fill it up, and then you take it home, use the gas, and then you recharge the gas bottle. We're doing exactly the same with electricity batteries. We're charging the batteries at a central point. People pay for that power to be recharged. They take it home, plug in all their equipment, and run their power system. Now, this is the modern way of doing things. This is what is to bring the 600+ million Africans who do not have access to electricity, half the world's population who do not have access to electricity, and all the transformative things electricity does, cooling, fridge, Wi-Fi, mobile phone charging, radio, all those things that need power, they're not getting because they don't have access to electricity. 660 million Africans on this continent. This is the single largest on the planet, and every business in the energy business should be in Africa to meet this demand and meet SDG 7 by 2030. So, you have to find new innovative ways, and that's what the solar and other renewable technologies are doing. They're bringing new ways of delivering power, and this is the modern world. And if you think of the analogy being, if I turned up on your door, Pat, and said to you, I'd like you to introduce you to a telephone. Here's a landline, and you plug it in, landline goes from your house to a major transformer station where there's an operator. You would laugh at me and say, look, guys, I've got a mobile phone. Why do I need to go back to that old technology of a landline? Well, it's exactly the same with the power market. The grid, the central grid with a central power station, is old technology. The world is transforming into new technology, decentralized grids, and solar is driving that technology chain that will bring power to those remote villages in Africa and in Botswana as well. There are 43 villages in Botswana who do not have access to electricity. They will get that through small mini-grid systems, which will be combined with solar and battery technology. But on your point about the contribution that Botswana and other African countries make to climate change, I want to be very clear here, because I may have misled you, or you may have misunderstood what I meant by the number one country in the world for coal production, which is true. Botswana is the number one country for producing electricity from coal, but there is no way Botswana can take any credit or problem from climate change. The amount of production and all it burns is nothing. It's not even a day's worth of running New York for one day is equivalent to the running the power in Botswana for a year. There's 2 million people here, and we have very low energy consumption compared to the hemisphere countries. So I don't want to mislead you there. I'm not saying we're responsible for climate change, but I do think we have an opportunity to show leadership in the region and dump and ditch the old technology and build a more climate resilient economy. And if you look at Kenya will be 97% renewable by 2030. I think they are more economically ready for the new world, because we're major industrialists. We had a new industrial revolution. This is the new clean energy industrial revolution, and we have to embrace it, because we will need all kinds of other bolt-on technologies and smart metering to drive this change. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Robert.
Yes, thank you for that. But that partially answered my question when it comes to affordability, because now for a household to fully set up solar, you need around from 4,500 US to 36,000 US. that is approximately in Botswana currency 61,971 to 495,000. So if I may say, when it comes to my usage of electricity in my household, say I'm paying around 29 US dollars per month, which is around 400 pula.
Paco,
How long will
Paco?
it take now to break even to that 36,000 US if I may switch right now to solar?
Robert,
Yeah.
before you come
Well,
in, thank you for that
thank-
question. Robert, thank you for that question, Paco. I'm going to intervene
Yeah,
here just
sure.
so we're not having a dialogue, because we do have other questions. And the price one can sometimes be subjective, looking at how big the scale of the project is. But when we now look at taking action, there's a question here hold on. There's a question here from Junior again, who says, what advice would you give for someone who wishes to get into the solar energy industry, but they don't have the experience? How does one go about navigating getting into the space? That one, I think you spoke to the one from Tiamo, but one from Busang as well is, have you considered private sector buy-in on pushing for more CSR initiatives that target sustainability? I believe we can have great influence when we speak to socio-economic policy. So perhaps then we're looking at bringing to maybe closing the cost of getting it with support from private sector. Maybe if we can briefly speak to those two, and then we'll take questions from Debato and Matla. Robert?
Yeah. Can I take the latter one first then? So I think there's a huge opportunity around ESG, environmental social governance. A lot of sort of local international companies are definitely picking that up, reporting on their environmental impact, and their energy consumption tends to be their second highest cost. So in Botswana, they're all looking, and as I said earlier, it is commercial industry that's driving the change, because it makes so much sense for them in terms of cost and compliance with their ESG targets. So there is a drive there, and we should leverage that. SEB is the first company in Botswana to subscribe to the UN Compact. So we are the company to get that in Botswana. We're working very hard to promote all the UN Compact 10 pillars of work, including ESG. So, we're demonstrating through our own work and action how we can to leverage those things. So they are very important leverages, and we should, as individuals, this is where we as individuals can have power, as consumers. That's our first choice. And letting our suppliers know that we choose products that can demonstrate a history of ESG compliance, and they're in their broadest possible sense, and that's much broader than just energy, as you know. So that's the first thing to say. There's definitely things happening in that sector, and there's funding available, and there's support. The renewable sector globally is receiving quite a lot of support with tariff interventions, and we have interventions in Botswana. In fact, the rooftop solar program, which was introduced, and all credit to BPC for introducing with support from Power Africa. It's a very innovative program, the first in Southern Africa, being done here in Botswana to encourage people to put solar on their residential and commercial properties. They don't get paid anything for the energy they overproduce and supply to the grid, but they get that power back on a one-to-one basis. So effectively, they're benefiting. And that speaks to the earlier question about cost, because cost is an issue. But as I said before, solar is a long-term investment. You must look at the long-term benefits rather than just the short term. It cost me this today, when do I get my money back story. ROI on most residential systems actually is about four years, and commercial can be in less than 2 years, 3 years, depending upon what you're doing. On the skills development side, young people, look, there's lots of opportunities developing. We'd be very happy to, anyone who's interested in developing a career, please contact us. As I said earlier, we provide opportunities for, we have the first BQA training course approved, which we also work with GIZ. We're very happy for people to come and gain experience and opportunity. You know, we want to increase local capacity in Botswana because this market is going to grow. There will be jobs, and my target and one of the personal targets is to create more jobs in the clean tech sector than we have digging up coal. And that's when government was really have to start listening, when we've created more jobs, and that's beginning to happen. So you know the two projects I mentioned earlier, the 1 megawatt and 3 megawatts in Bobanong, will create 5 new jobs, permanent jobs, which were there for 25, 30 years. So, you know, there's employment already beginning to happen, long-term employment, sustainable employment, not just the short-term employment around, you know, the construction of the site, which is obviously huge. You know, lots of people get employed, hundreds of people are employed. So it's a different scenario when you're talking about long. So I hope, Pato, that answers your questions.
It does. Thanks, Robert. And then Tebatso and Mata, we've got 5 more minutes. So if I can give you 1 minute each, and then in the last 3, maybe Robert can wrap up. Tebatso, then Mata.
Hello again. I'm concerned about recyclability. Are the material used on solar panels recyclable? After what happens to the solar panels after 20 to 30 years during disposal? Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
good question. And
Mata.
I think I did address that in my. I did address that in my earlier statement, but it is an issue the industry is beginning to think about. All solar panels can be recovered. Let's be very clear. So they can be. It's just making how we do that profitably and in a way that it doesn't cost money to the industry sector, so it prevents growth. But that is being dealt with. They're beginning to see the first mechanized decoupling and defragmenting systems happening. A lot of the material can be recycled and reused, so that's good news. None of the components are hazardous in terms of waste, so they're not waste actually, they're just waiting to be redeployed. So hopefully by the time modules will start needing to be replaced, maybe in 5-6 years time, you'll see early projects needing to be recycled. I'm pretty sure the industry will be up to speed in terms of recovery process.
Thanks, Robert. Matla?
Thank you very much, Robert, for your presentation. I have a slight short question. It pertains to the sustainability around solar and it being the preferred alternative energy compared to your nuclear, and your currently Botswana is using coal. Is it really going to be equitable? I mean, the development that we are trying to move towards, I'm not against solar, but I'm against, in a way, the not so equitable developments that are coming. And now we are speaking of solar. I'll just give you an example. You just mentioned something that happens in Jamataka village, which you said it was off-grid before you introduced the solar stations. Now I believe it's now on the grid, and now you have 2 developments that are in the village. We receive, as Botswana, we will receive the solar grid, and we'll also receive the BPC grid. But in other villages where there is none of the 2, they would also expect to have the BPC grid. Now, when we're talking sustainability, we don't want to go to the BPC route. We are looking at the sustainable development route, which is solar or any other alternative. Now, as Botswana, the development coming to us would not be equitably enjoyed, because now we are speaking something else, and they have never had street lighting or kettle lit inside the house. They know the kettle is on the fire. They know the kettle is either using coal or whatsoever. So how are we properly giving this sustainable development the equity and the dissemination, the dissemination of the information down there where people are not as developed as we are? Are we having any glitches in terms of the understanding of the equitable, sustainable development? Thank you. I might be long, but I think someone would have captured me.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. That's a very, very good point, actually. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yes, we
Sorry,
I hear you
can.
well.
hello? Yeah,
Yes,
sorry. Yeah, sorry about
we
that.
can
I've got
hear you
lots of
very well.
messages coming in all over the place. So let me answer that question. It's a very, very good, actually, because traveling around the country and talking to people, people seem to think there's a difference between the grid and solar electricity. There isn't. Electricity is electricity. It's as simple as that. That's the first thing to say. And I think this is a sort of an awareness raising thing. There's no difference. And as I said earlier, you know, we working with the owners of the project, Sturdy, are pumping solar power into the grid for people to use. So when they switch the lights on in Botswana, they're probably going to get their electricity from solar, not from the old power fire station, except for nighttime. So we have to get people to understand there's no difference. But in the villages where there is no grid, and you're providing these battery technologies that I talked about at Jamataka, you know, yes, there are limits to what the battery can do, because the cost of the battery is expensive. So we've designed a system in Jamataka to actually multiply up the battery, so you can literally run a small business on your battery, you know, on the daytime and nighttime use. So, you know, those additionality in terms of energy demand has to be looked at. I mean, as I said, working the grid, best system in Botswana at the moment is definitely solar and grid working together. There's no doubt about that. It's seamless. You wouldn't know where your power's coming from. It doesn't make any difference to you, but you're getting the cost benefits of the reduced cost of your solar and the return on the investment that you've made. And secondly, you're reducing your carbon footprint, individual or a business. So you can take the credit for that, and we give you information on your carbon offset, give you that information free to tell you how you're doing on your environmental performance. But you know, and as I mentioned earlier, there are many villages in Botswana, and if you look at the rest of the continent, you know, there are many, many, many villages that will never be on the grid, because it will never. The BPC could not afford to put the grid in for the number of consumers at the other end who are the off takers. So it's not going to happen. So we have to develop mini grid systems around, like the one we've done at Jamataka, and multiply those up. In fact, we are doing that. We're building them in Malawi. We're going to be building them in Zambia, and we're going to be definitely doing more in Botswana in the next 2 to 3 years, because there are villages already identified. And part of the learning process, part of the advantage of the situation we have, because we have so many communities off grid, is an opportunity to be able to export the knowledge and the technologies that we develop to meet the demand that the consumer has. Because I can tell you, and you're absolutely right, once people see the light and the transformative benefit that electricity brings to their lives, the first thing they want is more. They want more power so they can run more gadgets, more things, the radios, flat screen televisions, Wi-Fi, internet, charging the laptops, everything else that you and I enjoy, they want it, and you absolutely deserve it. So we have to give them the technologies to be able to power their homes in a way that's almost seamless to the experience you have in the cities. Now, the only other point I want to make is I can use the example of Jamataka because I know it, and I've worked with that community since 2018. When the power line came in, after we started our project, by the way, which is not an issue, I can tell you today, after 18 months, only people in that village have connected to the power. Only 20. So the power's there. You know, the line is there, but people aren't connecting. Now, there are all kinds of reasons for that, and BPC are addressing some of those, and the Ministry of Energy. You know, the cost of connection is expensive, and then you have to buy the power. You have to pay for everything you use, every kilowatt hour, even though it's a subsidized, very heavily subsidized cost, it still costs you. If you don't buy it, you don't get it. So you have the on cost. You don't have those costs with solar. You know, solar, once you install the system, it's there. It gives you a power. God doesn't send you a bill every month and ask you to prepay. He just gives it to you, or she gives it to you, and you get that electricity into your house. So there are, you know, barriers that prevent people who have access to the grid because the power line's there, but they cannot afford to connect. Now, I know the government and BPC and Ministry of Energy are working towards making the connection fees more affordable and looking at all kinds of ways to try and get connections, but people are still not doing it. And as I mentioned, in Jamataka, I can tell you, only 20 people, households in that village have connected in 18 months out of 1,000 people. So there's a huge gap there, and a lot more people are using solar than there are using the grid connection.
Thank you so much for that, Robert. Thank you for that very informative session and presenting some alternatives in terms of a sustainable development. A country that is developing sustainably, what we should be looking at in terms of energy provision. Thank you so much for making time and being a good sport and stepping in a little bit early to allow us to work our schedule. So we're supposed to have a couple of minutes comfort break. So if you can, we're just going to do a quick stretch. If you can, please switch on your camera, and then yeah, I'll lead the comfort break stretching, because we've been here for a while. We've now been sitting for 2 hours, and we have about 2 more hours to go. Yeah.
So get out into that sun and enjoy the rays.
Well, not quite yet. At 12 when you
Yeah.
finish, definitely. At 12 when you finish, definitely.
Yeah.
But if you're at your table, please stretch up. Well, hopefully switch your camera on. So because no one has their camera, I'm going to hope that we're all doing this together. And then stretch to the side, lean right over, and then stretch and lean right over to the other side.
I look crazy.
Thanks, and then you're gonna get up and walk around your chair. You're gonna get up, stand behind your chair, and you're gonna stretch up again. You're gonna lean to the sides. Ooh, lean to the other side. And you're gonna walk briskly with a lot of energy back to your chair. And that is our stretch and energizer. Before we start our panel, so thank you for being such a good sport and joining as well. Shasha, I'm glad it helped. So with that, I will be handing over to the moderator for the next session, and she will be moderating a session on climate change, a threat multiplier. So far, we've talked about the different impacts that climate change has on development or the lack thereof, and what kind of a problem it is. And that's what we shall be going into in the next session. Are you with us?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I am.
Good morning. Handing over to you.
Thank you so very much. I trust that I see my panelists in the room. I'm missing a Vincent, but hopefully he will join us in time. Good morning, everyone. My name is LCOY-BW, and I am a development practitioner, a cultural architect, and a communication specialist born in Botswana, based in Botswana at the moment, with a significant interest in the politics of the global North and the global South, as is often referred to in development speak. Now, my interest, especially as a human rights practitioner and a human rights advocate, has been around applying, and I know we oftentimes talk about applying a human rights lens or applying a feminist lens to matters that we need to grapple with, because more often than not, those are not the points of departure where the politics already start being considered. So with our conversation today, I'm really grateful to be joined by 3 people who will assist in carrying the weight of nuancing and complicating the ways in which we consider climate change. So as a climate justice, disability justice advocate who also happens to be a queer justice and development justice advocate. All of these for me come back down to the feminist core of how do we strip inequality? How do we make inequality optional, and optional only at the furthest end of running out of solutions? So how do we ensure that as we apply ourselves towards whatever we frame or consider to be development, we aren't working towards generating inequality that doesn't need to be generated, much as Robert was just saying now with regards to there are villages in Botswana that will not find themselves getting onto the grid simply because of the service provision that the capacity of BPC can accommodate. However, that is not to say, oh, hello, Vincent. So that is not to say that these villages cannot get electrified. And so how do we move in understanding that there will not be the basic grid? How do we already start planning towards microgrids? So it's not a matter of let's do one and then do another, but simultaneous and understanding that the needs continuously morph, the needs continuously evolve. And as a result, the ways in which we meet these needs to itself be evolutionary. As we talk about a threat multiplier, threats appear in multiple ways in different spaces. And so no single solution can ever be applied. But with me framing the conversation that way, I'd like to first introduce you to one of my panelists for the day, who is Gaborone Valencia Mudisa-Hape. Gaborone is the founder and director of Val Interiors Pty Ltd, an interior architecture firm that has been making waves since its establishment in 2009. With branches in both Gaborone, where headquarters is, and Francistown, where the sub-headquarters is, Val Interiors has carved a significant niche in Botswana's business landscape with a portfolio including various sectors such as mining, construction, tourism, and infrastructure. She is an alumnus of Lim Kok Wing University of Technology in Malaysia, having graduated from there in 2000 and with an advanced diploma in interior design, as well as having graduated from Curtin University in Australia, where she obtained a BA degree in interior architecture. So this is somebody who's been involved and invested in the built environment. A great concern of mine when we look at accessibility and justice. I would also like to welcome Vincent Bagiwa, who is a public health research fellow at the Okavango Research Institute under the University of Botswana. Vincent's interests include health policy and systems research, health policy analysis, health systems financing, benefit incidence analysis, and decision-making in health financing, as well as health systems strengthening, disease mapping, and stratification. So these are the spaces where somebody who comes in with a background like Vincent, who is in policy analysis and public health research, can help us really understand what the implications are when we look at how we think of climate as something we live with rather than something we suffer. And my last panelist is Mbiganyi Taka, who is the president of the Botswana Agricultural Sciences Professionals Association. Mbiganyi holds a degree in soil and water conservation engineering from the Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, BUAN, and is currently working towards a master's in research and public policy at the University of Botswana. Having founded the BASPA, he has a multifaceted experience in executive management of organizations, and particular strengths include developing and implementing innovative programs products and services, leading and designing programs, as well as leading organizations and departments through periods of sustainable growth and transition. Now, that's been a great mouthful of letting you know the three folks that I'm going to be sharing this space with. And I would like to start our conversation, my dear panelists, with you responding to one question. It might seem it's rather loaded, but I will give you 3 minutes each to respond to the question of how do you even start, how do we start talking about looking at climate change through the lens of perceived or practical threat? So how do we look, how do we look at climate change through the lenses of perceived threat, where it might have to do with geographic dislocation, or practical threat, where it is a matter of we see it now. It isn't a thing that is in our heads. It is right now happening. And when you respond, please could you turn on your camera if you are able to do so. We'll start with, in reverse order, Mbiganyi, would you like to go first? In the event that Mbiganyi is having connectivity issues, could Vincent go? And we'll double back.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Vincent. Yes, we can.
Sorry about my voice. I'll try my best to be audible. And thank you so much for the question and the opportunity that you gave me to be part of this discussion or dialogue. In response to your question, I'll be a bit more biased to the health sector or to the health issues, as I'll be representing that. Climate change actually is already posing a threat to human health in several ways. It doesn't mean that we need any more evidence than what we see now. So we are seeing that it is already posing a threat, and also which include the death and illness from a lot of events that are taking place now, such as extreme weather events, heat waves, storms, floods, disruption of food systems, increasing zoonotic infections. We have seen with COVID-19, which is a good example of that. We've got water, vector-borne diseases, especially in the area where I am, in the Okavango Delta. We always hear of the diarrhea outbreaks, which are really linked to the issue around climate change. Also, mental health issues, especially among the youth. So it's a health issue that we cannot ignore. So climate change is really undermining many of the social determinants of good health, such as livelihoods, equitable access to health care and social support systems, because we know that healthcare systems has to respond to all these threats or issues that comes with climate change. And also what we might look at is how these risks are disproportionately felt, especially among the vulnerable and disadvantaged, which include women, include girls, ethnic minorities, the poor communities, the elderly people, and all those who have some underlying conditions. That if people are not well, and there is extreme heat, we always hear of heat strokes. It always targets those who are not well or who have got some underlying conditions. So that's what I can really link to the perceived or to the practical risk that we see at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy that you've already started to lay out some of the corners and the neighborhoods we're going to jump into in this conversation. Mbiganyi, are you there, or shall we go over to Tebi? All right, Tebi.
Good morning. Is it good morning yet or afternoon?
Yes, it's still morning.
It's still morning.
So
Thank
how
you so
do we
much,
respond to, how do we look at climate change through the lens of perceived or practical threat?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I can't turn on my camera. I've got a sluggish internet battery. I'm going to take you back in how we used to live as Botswana. I think when we talk about climate change, it's a different language to a lot of us. It's a language that we need to unpack for how we used to live, how to play, how we used to work. And for me, I was laughing earlier when I was logging in. I realized that indeed I'm in a group of young people because the age limit was at 35, and just it reminded me that I'm actually here with you. And I don't know who recalls how they used to live, how they used to play back in the day, where everything was so beautiful. You know, go out and play outside, go up the tree. You know, there was nothing like, you know, gaming like our kids are doing nowadays, even our adults are doing. We used to ride bicycles, we used to, you know, do a lot of recycling. Trees were there, we would go under the trees. Climate change is happening now, and we need to take a look at weather patterns. Today, we don't know if it's autumn, if it's summer, if it's spring, if it's winter. What's happening to our environment? What's happening to our country? We need to look at that. We need to look at the type of buildings that we built in Botswana. How we used to build in the early ages with vernacular architecture. I'm talking about your thatched, your mud houses and thatched houses. And if you look at for those people who had the opportunity to stay in a mud house, you would understand that we had everything, you know. Our buildings were thermal, and they are still thermal. You didn't have to have aircon or whatever that will generate lighting or a light into your space. It was all good. It was beautiful, but we moved that to modernizing our architecture to copy the Western. And here we are talking about climate change. The impact, as Vincent had alluded, we're talking about rising temperatures, changing of the rainfall patterns, the weather conditions, as I've mentioned, and it affects our environment, economy, our society. So,
I think we might have lost Tebby, unless I am just the only one. I'm really happy with where we've started, especially considering the fact that we have a number of issues that have been mentioned that very often don't get thought about when we look at climate change and how we think about climate change. But again, coming back to our question of the threat multiplication, it's not to say climate change introduces threats. It is to say some threats are exacerbated by the impacts of climate change. And Tebby was talking about, in a reminiscent way. Okay, yes, Tebo. Welcome back. So Tebo was talking about how, and again, in this reminiscent way where very often we say, you know, back in the day, and in this particular collective of young folks saying, my back in the day is about playing outdoors. It's not necessarily about the herding patterns or being able to read the clouds, which is the back in the day for 2 generations, 3 generations prior to us. And so I would like to find out, in looking at these systems of inheritance, we've got a lot of inherited systems, and the way we assess our preparedness for change. You mentioned that as the infrastructural development was happening or continues to happen in Botswana, I want to find out, how does the built environment in Botswana present a viable risk as we continue to develop infrastructure? Because we aren't acknowledging the science behind clay. We aren't acknowledging the science behind the forms of cooling systems we use. However, the more we use air conditioning, we know that we are further adding to all the things that we need air conditioning from. So how is our built environment presenting a viable risk as we continue to develop infrastructurally in Botswana?
Okay, thank you so much. And I hope the network doesn't disappear again. I'm going to take you back again, that when our mothers, our grandmothers used to build homes, right? If anyone recalls, I believe Vincent is here to remember. We used, as children in the community, we used to collect cow dung early in the mornings, where we collected cow dung to help build our homes. We're part of the building, bricks, out of that. And we saw our grandmothers molding these beautiful bricks. And voila, that's your home. And you collected just a few steps away from your house. The grass was collected by men, some women, and you could see the unity, the union when you build these homes, And fast forward, what we see is that we take concrete, we take cement from far as wherever, I can't mention places outside the country, and that increases our carbon emissions. We're saying, let's reduce, but we keep on increasing. We're taking tiles that we don't know where they come from, how they are built, how they are made, how they are constructed. And this it poses threats to our lives. We call these things the building sick syndrome, where we don't know what you are inhaling. A paint that you think is cheap, a friend of mine says cheap is expensive. Anything that is cheap, be worried, because you don't know what you're inhaling. And the next thing, what you develop are ulcers, whatever, you've got sensitive skin and everything else. So it's very important to understand that for buildings that we live in, we need to look at whether it's a new building or it's an old building. We need to look at energy efficient buildings or strategies. How are we collecting our water? How are we reducing our water from our faucets, from our taps, and even from our toilets. So all these things, there's a lot that we need to unpack when you talk about infrastructure, your green infrastructure that speaks to energy efficient buildings, green spaces, sustainable transportation systems, and just to promote the construction and energy of energy and climate resilient buildings. We need to see more young architects, young designers, young engineers engaged in the designing and implementation of green projects. This is how we create jobs. Imagine now from this, when you are building a modern house, what happens to your waste? We call it construction waste. We dump it into the landfills. What happens to our environment? There's a lot. I think we just have to have, to tell our stories, how we started, the timeline, how we started and where we are. And if it means going back slightly to understand how we used to live. Our grandparents were living beautiful. I'm sure wherever they are very upset with us because we are taking our country to a different world. Thank you. I hope I answered your question, Katlego.
No, you started to inch away at it. And again, I love the fact that there's multidimensionality in this. When you talk about it's one thing to look at the building of the house. It's another thing to be conscious of the waste that is involved in the building of the structure. And similarly, we find that you want to get as much natural light as possible so that you can spend time not using electrical power. However, the ways in which the infrastructure is often built is it either brings all the light in through a window and therefore heating up the interior, or it doesn't bring in enough, which then results in using the lights very early on in the day. And these are some of the sciences and the technological applications of, indigenous knowledge that have already existed. And I'm very often, I caution the so far back in the day, because I do declare that further away from the grid spaces, we can still find, and we still find, these forms of infrastructure that worked and continue to work in the favor as a coexistence with the environment. And now I'd like to actually bring Vincent in. When we look at you've already mentioned health-related, climate-related matters that often go unseen. And at this very present moment in time, to also tie into what the Boho is saying, there is a suit, there's a number of lawsuits that have been rising across the West. So one was ruled on in the United States of America just recently, and there is one that is being presented by some youths from Syria, and their issue, one of them, is that because of climate change and a lack of climate adaptability, they are losing out on their quality of life. You've mentioned mental health matters, the fact that you can't go outdoors, you have limited time to spend outdoors, enjoying the playground that nature provides rather than sitting indoors, not being able to socialize at certain times of the day, when, of course, those should be the safer times. These are all part of health. Yet when we look at the health provisions in countries like Botswana, where we've got a supposedly universal free healthcare system, there are people who are still rather dislocated from the core system. And I want to find out, how do we make being climate conscious more than just an environmental issue and make it a very clear healthcare concern in such a way that we are able to teach climate-related modules at tertiary level as part of biology, where we're able to, at the nursing college, teach about climate impact on health. How do we bring that into the fold? Because this is the space you work in, looking at health financing, looking at policy. How do we make climate consciousness an environmental as well as healthcare concern?
All right, thank you so much, Katlaho, for your question. Yeah, I'll try to answer it, also building up on what my colleague just said, Debo. Like I said before, climate change affects the social and environmental determinants of health. And, when we talk about the determinants of health, we talk about, the environment, the factors that we live within, including the infrastructure she was talking about, clean air, the water we drink, sufficient food, shelter, etc. So you may find that, like she was saying, things have changed. Nowadays, it's very difficult for us to enjoy the atmosphere, to enjoy playing, or kids to enjoy playing outside. We keep on, get inside the house, it's too hot. Because we are so cautious that, by doing that, we're exposing them to, health threats. They will ultimately get some complications because of that. So this is a serious issue that we don't need to neglect. And also, it's not something that is here to end. We are seeing this is going to be a problem going forward. And it estimated that maybe between 2030 and 2050, climate change will cause even maybe 250,000 more deaths a year, which will be a result from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. So we are seeing that this thing, if not managed, then we are going to have those kind of problems. And not like you're talking of the health systems, which are free, which are kind of accessible to everybody, regardless of their ability to pay. But because of the climate change, we're going to there are going to be more direct costs to health, excluding the costs in health determining sectors like agriculture, water, and sanitation. So it is estimated also that the cost globally will be between 2 to 4 billion by 2030. So which will also be a pressure for the health system of Botswana, which is heavily reliant on taxpayers' money. So we need to do something because at the end of the day, we're not gonna be able to manage to take care of them. Of the threats that comes with climate change. We saw with COVID-19 what happened. You know, the health system was not ready. It wasn't prepared to manage and to control the disease. And the system was just to come. I mean, the government was to come up with a quick fix system, to manage things. And there were no policies or preparedness that the Ministry of Health has. So, and that led to such haphazard kind of ways of managing the public health threat. So it's really goes beyond just the availability of infectious diseases, but also to the healthcare systems as well. Something that we also need to note is the exposure pathways. We need to look at what should we guard? What should we be looking for as a country? We have vulnerable places or areas in the country that can be affected by climate change. Where I am in the Gaborone Delta is one of the places that we need to be sensitive to, because we always, if I give you a good example, we have bilharzia, which was one of the diseases that we thought we have eliminated. And the surveillance systems, the control measures, even the program itself was phased out. So it was no longer existing. But of recent, some studies or research that have been done in the area actually have proved that bilharzia still exists because it was actually identified in kids, in the primary school going kids. And the government, that's when they, came with a mass drug campaign, to treat that. So it's something that shows us that climate change, and climate variability. We don't need only talk about climate change, but also the climate variability because it also affects health directly. So these are some of the things that we need to do, put more research on, be at the guard, look at the vector distribution and its etiology. What are the vectors like for the schistosomiasis, which is bilharzia, is the snails that moves depending on the floods. If it's flooding more because of climate change or weather extreme, weather threat, then we expect the snails to move towards people where they are living. It's also a threat not only to the kids, but even to those who are engaging with the water. People are fishing, women are washing in the river, tourists are swimming in the river. So if we don't look at that, then we are posing a lot of threats on people's health as far as climate change is concerned and the health. Also, we need to strengthen our healthcare systems, build resilient health systems, look at leadership, health workforce. We need to train our healthcare providers to be climate sensitive. If someone like, for example, bilharzia I was talking about, we don't have records that there are people who have gone to a clinic or a hospital and they were diagnosed of bilharzia, but it's there. This means there was a misdiagnosis that took place. So we need to train them to be alert, to know what are the threats. If they consult people, what are the diseases to be mindful of? I know they are doing very well with malaria at this side, but there is more of other threatening diseases that they should also be looking at, and also, do more research and do more investigations to make sure that people are safe. So talk about health financing, which is one of the crucial issues around preparedness. So we saw with COVID-19 that, even the health system in Botswana was not prepared to finance and to manage the pandemic. It's very crucial that we really advocate for a sustainable healthcare financing system or contingent funding that can be able to manage such disasters, because that was a good lesson. We cannot always use a quick fix system, but we should always be prepared. We need to have good policies that emphasize, pulling of funding from all sources that we saw the government was trying to pull. We need to do it earlier, not during the event. So I think said much of what I can say in relation to linking the climate change and health and the threats. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy that, again, we're bringing forward the different spaces that need to be involved. Very often, we're seeing more and more now. At the very beginning, it's just the scientists having this conversation, and it's scientists versus states. Then it moved into, let's build a corporate case or a business case for climate change. Then it moved to, let's bring in a humanitarian angle or solution or case towards climate change. Health is now encroaching closer and closer and closer. And in that, health is so all-encompassing that very often it then seems as though we don't pay attention to the nuances, to the little things that need multiple people. We keep talking about bringing young people to the table. We want to say, let's bring in the women into the fold, because women are more often at the forefront of being impacted by climate-related changes. However, there's a very important reason we need to have this conversation here as part of the LCOY, right? Is the fact that there is mystery. There is so much mystery that tends to shroud policy. So when we talk about policy, we oftentimes think of it as a hypothetical thing, because so it's hypothetical rather than something that is actionable. So I want to pose this to the two of you. Mbiganyi still isn't able to connect with us, but we move on in hope. I was going to ask who is getting left behind, and right now Mbiganyi is getting left behind, but we will patch up as we go. When you look at, I want to pose to the two of you, particularly looking at how much policy plays a role in the industries you're able to that you operate within, in the agricultural, architectural space. In the architectural space, not only are there policies and regulatory bodies, but again, these are for multiple sectors. So it's not just about how to build a warehouse that will be for food management, or how to build a high-rise apartment block. There are policies that are involved in ensuring safety at a national level. Same thing with spaces of healthcare. There are policies, but they are insufficient at times. So what happens when changes in policy? What are the challenges in policy development and implementation in Botswana right now? What are the fine challenges, and how do these increase the threat to life, governance, and peace? Because I would like to think that these three are the very cornerstones of what we then say allows us to have a democracy or a stable state. So what are the challenges in policy development and implementation in Botswana? Because sometimes we know that the policy exists, but there's no implementation plan for it. Is it a matter of funding? Is it a matter of having knowledgeable personnel? Is it political will? What are the challenges?
Hi, can I take this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to speak mostly on the construction and the built environment, because that's what I know mostly, and working with startups and being practical. I've learned to visit different landfills. Like I said, I also, of course, I add into the problem as a designer and somebody who constructs these spaces. We dump our construction waste into different landfills. And as much as you try to segregate because you have, and you believe that you can, it's unfortunate that the landfills are not ready for you. Not all of them. I'm happy to say I've visited one of the mining landfills, and I hear Ramuswa landfill is one of the best, cleanest and organized landfills. It's said that, you know, the landfills are not ready for waste segregation. Yet we're talking diverting waste from the landfills. So when you spoke about that, I was having an internal conversation yesterday, actually saying what's happening to our policies. And I think as young people here, we think policies are for old people. They should not be involved. But what I understand, being part of the Botswana Green Building Council and sitting with different ministries, or should I say line ministries, these people who are making policies, they need help. They need help. We need to be part of the conversation, whether it's a working group, whether you are making a comment into a draft that needs to go out, you need to be part of this because you are on the ground. You see problems. They don't see problems. So it's very important that sometimes I wish they can just go out and experience what we experience as the private sector or the civil society, and understand when they come back, they have a different mindset. You know, we talk about mindset, maybe that could happen so that they understand, and when they make these policies, they involve issues that are relevant or issues that are currently happening. So it's very important that we involve young people. And I'm saying young people because they have energy. The young people still have the energies, they still have the drive, they still have the idea bring into I looked into, but let's not forget you people who are sitting here, we have to make decisions because you are frustrated. You are the future of this country. So you need to be involved. Thank you.
But okay, I'm going to build on this as I ask Vincent to give me his version of the challenges in policy development and implementation, especially from the perspective of research. We don't have opportunities at present in this country, in its political setup, to establish pressure groups, to establish lobbying groups, where there is it isn't just a matter of some of the smart ones are doing it, because it also becomes this conversation between Nakanaha reads. You already spoke about it being climate change, introducing new language to us, but that is not to say the discussions have not been being had for generations now. So when we include these young people, what are we including them into that is not going to be only seeing them as young people, only seeing them as the future of, when we face these challenges of not only just the development of prepared policy, but its implementation, seeing the follow through happen. Vincent?
Yes, thank you again, Katla. That's a very interesting question. I'll say, I'll start with where you ended, about the inclusion of the lobby groups, like the youth. The challenge we have in this country is our system. It's a top-down kind of a decision-making system where the elite top, they make decisions, pass to the implementers, who are the ministries, and then it goes down to the community, to the local communities. So we don't usually participate in decision making or in the policy making process. We just receive, and then at the end of the day, the implementer just implements, whether they understand the policy or they don't. They just implement. So that's where the huge problem we have. So unlike other countries where usually when a policy is being developed, they can adopt both systems where they have got a bottom-up kind of system where the lobby groups are allowed to voice out, especially even those who are the most vulnerable or the most affected people. They know their needs better But if sometimes a policy just comes like that, it becomes even difficult to implement. There are issues even in the Ministry of Health, or should I say in the health sector, when it comes to policies around climate change and health. So it's so clear. This does not need any political will or any political influence. It's so clear there's a Public Health Act, which of 2013, which actually guides and enforces that there should be a public health emergency preparedness and response plan, which should be established by the Ministry of Health. That's supposed to be there. And also the National Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy of 2013 and 2018, it clearly gives the powers to the implementers, to come up with those strategies to mitigate or strategies to prepare for disasters. The agriculture have done so well, especially when they were doing their disaster plan for the foot and mouth. They had so many strategies in place which worked for them. But with the Ministry of Health, the challenge is that they don't have anything established or which is working, which can actually help in as far as climate change or public health disasters is concerned. And we have seen that we did a study after the COVID-19 just to kind of unpack and investigate why did things happen the way they happened, and to realize that the ministry really had a public health emergency management plan draft, but it was not yet implemented. If something is not approved by Parliament, it's not approved, it cannot be used. So that's why they were kind of a quick fix system that was put in place. So that's where the challenge is. Sometimes we do have good policies, sometimes we do have good strategies, but we take time to put them to use. Sometimes we take time to also, because if you prepare a policy, you need now to also to prepare an implementation plan. How are you going to implement that? So I think even when with the COVID experience, we should now be ready to know where we can get money, how we can lobby in money. If it's contingency funding, how can we lobby for that? If it's a prepayment or kind of a system, a national health insurance system, that can be done. And you realize also the inclusion of the private sector, like the medical aid schemes. They came in later because there was nothing that could, people have invested a lot in the insurance, but it came later because there's no policy, there's nothing pressurizing those guys to chip in. So we really need to understand that the plans are there, the ideas are there, but we have issues with implementation as I speak. And also there's one crucial policy that needs to be there, which is the National Health Adaptation Plan, which is supposed to be a subset of the National Health Plan. National Adaptive Plan. So we should have a National Health Adaptation Plan. So the reason why we can't have it is because we need to do a vulnerability and adaptive capacity assessment, which is a crucial component, which is feed into that. So because of finances, the government or the ministry cannot carry out that exercise. And we are going to stay without that adaptation plan until we do that vulnerability assessment. So it's issues around implementation and issues around financing. And I think we still have a lot also in terms of convincing the government that health is also a commodity. Although it's a bit different from other commodities, we really need to find solutions on finding sustainable health financing strategy. Diamonds are not forever. We need to be prepared, even how we finance our health. We might have a bigger challenge than COVID. How are we going to finance that? So we need to move away from the Good Samaritan kind of healthcare system and try to establish a system where it's sustainable and everybody will be taken care of. Yeah, I think maybe I've gone off the policy issue, but that's basically my opinion or my answer to your question. Thank you.
No, I mean, you didn't quite go off the policy thing because, again, the policy issue is all-encompassing. And I'm appreciative of the fact that you introduce the National Health Plan, for example, as an avenue for climate justice advocates to start working through. And of course, we end up with it matters of whose jurisdiction is it. Do we go to Ministry of Environment to go and talk about healthcare? They'll say, no, go to the Ministry of Health because it's health, as opposed to, no, because of your factors from the ministry that you oversee in the Ministry of Environment, it is in fact affecting the health outcomes. We've seen it with the multi-ministerial commission on gender-based violence. Trying to bring that commission together seemed like everybody wanted to shirk the responsibility and say, no, but it's not mine. I mean, maybe it might be these. And so this idea that we don't understand that our issues are intersectional, and in that intersection, we cannot wait to consistently have one leader and a whole lot of followers. We can all co-lead and share the load. At this point, I'd like to open it to the audience. I know we've got about 10 minutes left. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to offer a reflection, who would like to pose a question, please do so. You may pose it to me, to Gaborone, or to Vincent. I'm not sure if the back end is able to see if people are raising their hands.
We don't have any hands for now, but
All
let
right.
me use co-host so you're able to see that.
I'm trying to raise my hand.
Please go ahead.
Yes, please say something, and then I'll take Oratile's question.
That's for the gentleman who said they were trying to raise their hand, yes?
Yes.
Okay, good morning.
Good
my name
morning.
Yes, my name is William Marawane. My question is related to Metebo. It's on green buildings standards. Last time I checked with Botswana Bureau of Standards with regards to green buildings, they didn't have anything. So I just wanted to find out as of today or latest, how far are we in terms of standards and regulations for green buildings? Because for us in the renewable energy or in the energy sector, we believe that green building starts from the paper, like at the architect level. And my second question is on as architects, what is your take when it comes to vernacular buildings? Do they play any role? Can they play any role in the sustainable building, concepts that we have or that we can use as a country, as a region, and as a continent? And that's what I wanted to ask. I thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Uwile. And before I let the Gaborone answer, now this is a question that I think will most likely is a challenge towards to Vincent, in that is the challenge in the policy and not the fact that the policies themselves are outdated. So we talk about the availability of some policies. We also talk about the lack of some policies, but is it the matter that it is the policy and the implementation plan, or is it the fact that the policies themselves still need to be rehashed? And I think Gaborone already answered a portion of Uwile's question around vernacular building. And I wanted to introduce something to Gaborone's answer, towards Gaborone's answer, around green building. Because most recently, when Botswana was reporting back on its what it has done regarding the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, one of the judgment criteria is around the built environment and the infrastructural provisions that are given to prevent the violations of the human rights of persons with disabilities. But in many of our cities, we don't have sidewalks that a wheelchair user can use, never mind a cyclist. Yet there is an entire policy that has been written to say every single building must pass the basic code of accessibility. So has this also moved into or found its way into the considerations of green building? Or is green building sitting on top of policies that have not been considered? Or people keep lying about to say, no, we've got a wheelchair ramp, but then we've got steps everywhere else in the building. Is there anybody else with a question? Otherwise, we'll dive into these two. All right, I guess they'll hold their peace. Let's start with.
Can I start before I forget my answer?
Yes, so green building codes and the provisions that are made to ensure that they are being abided to.
Okay, for the Botswana Bureau of Standards, Botswana Green Building Council sit with the committee. We haven't really moved much since COVID. Yeah, that's what I can say. But I guess us sitting there will help to endorse and to educate, because I think when we start, we need to be mindful that not everyone understands what's happening, the best practices or international practices. So it's important to educate, advocate before we can move into understanding of the elephant in the room, you know. So it's important that from the back end, we do a lot of meet and greet with line ministries that speak to the green building initiatives. And especially we understand, and I saw earlier people posting about working silos. We work in silos in Botswana, and that's killing us. And you can imagine Vincent sitting at University of Botswana and about Botswana Green Building Council. He has no clue about the green startups are trying to, eco building materials, and they just need support to materials. So there's a lot that needs to, as collective, and need to come together and say, okay, what do we say? Can we help with push the agenda of green buildings and let it be a mandatory through the building codes? Just like when you go to council, there are certain things that you have to comply. And this is how we create green. We say about circular economy. Ramp F, we talk about ramp F, vertical architecture. I say but if you are a lot of ramp houses in Botswana, particularly on
it would seem that we lost Gaborone to the internet. Vincent, can I ask you to respond?
Hi, Katlego, we seem to have lost you as well.
Hello.
Now we can hear you.
Okay. So I was saying, Vincent, if you could just respond to that question on, is it inadequacy of policies or is it the fact that they're out of date? What seems to be the policy issue? Therefore, we know where to meet that gap.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think when it comes to policies, guidelines, and standards, those ones we are doing a bit more well. I don't know with other sectors, but with health, you find that there is a drive towards those. The only issue that I'm seeing, like what Gaborone said, is that most of the policies are more sector-centric, such that they operate in silos. So when you come to issues around climate change, which actually is a subject that also caters for other ministries like Ministry of the Environment, Ministry of Agriculture, it becomes a problem to implement such a policy without the input of those sectors. So most of the policies that I've seen, yes, they can be updated. Like right now, they're revising most of the policies that which are old. But the issue here is how the design of the policy, how the policies are designed, what they're trying to address. The thing that usually takes long to be updated, these are the acts, because those ones are, it's a decision that goes to the parliament and stuff. But those are the ones which really takes long. We find that maybe we're operating with a very, very old act. But when it comes to policies, that can change every 5 years, every 10 years. Some, they don't change, or they are not revised simply because they were not adopted or they were not approved. It's a document that is there. Usually what is the problem is the adoption of policies in Botswana. It takes long because Parliament also have to adopt those, but most drafts are there. So that's the problem, major problem that we do have, if I can say. Yeah.
Great. Now, thank you very much. We have come to the end of our conversation, and thankfully, Gaborone has managed to join. So, Gaborone, for fear of you getting cut off, again.
I have to use my phone now. Okay.
So for fear of you getting cut off, I am giving you 1 minute to give your parting reflection and perhaps a call to action to the audience. We've already spoken about how we need to not talk in silos. We've spoken about how we need to return to knowledges that we have in us, re-earthing a few things. I'm going to give you 1 minute, and Vincent 1 minute as well. What is the last parting item that you can say to the youth in this room, and also a call to action? More than just we have problems. What is the call to action?
Well, problems can be turned into solutions. So I never consider problems, right? As for the youth, please, guys, volunteer yourself, volunteer your time, stop complaining. When you volunteer, when you just reach out, when you see things happening out there, LinkedIn, go and clean up your LinkedIn and just follow people that you want to follow, whether you are following energy people, sustainable, whoever, follow them and inquire. There is message chats that you can always chat and say, can I be part of this? Can I come and volunteer a month or two and learn? As you do that, you learn, you increase your networks, you increase your contacts, and knowledge sharing is important. When you see something that is not for you and you know very well is for somebody else, reach out, forward it to them. And the more you do that, you realize you are doing something impactful, and you don't even realize that you're working. You are going to do it with so much love. When you go out and you see, something that speaks to, or the government posted something, don't complain, don't start sharing things frustrated, or people are watching. The next thing you're going to ask for a job, and then they will start saying this person is not for us. So it's important when you see something behind the scenes, just go and reach out and find out how you can be part of this. You go far. And the more you do that, the more invitations will come to you. The next thing what is going to happen is you're going to have invitations. It could be a free training that somebody would have paid a lot of money. It could be an invitation to speak. It could be a job. It could be a partnership. because there are a lot of people who are willing and wishing and they're dying to come to Botswana. You have no idea how much Botswana is threatening. We are a hidden gem. 1 minute. Thank you so much.
Vincent, your final minute.
Okay, I see Tanaya's hand was up. I don't know if you're going to cut him off or her off. Okay.
We don't have time.
Okay. All right. I'll say there is now a political will to listen to the youth. And that's the most important thing. So I think we should just all every opportunity that we can voice out, to voice out what are the challenges that the youth are facing. I once attended a conference in Rwanda, and there was a youth session which I just attended. And the surprising thing was that the panelist was the directors, old directors from ministries, and even the panel coordinator, director or moderator was an adult. So the questions that came were, where are the youth? Why are we listening to advocates? I mean, if you keep on referring to your time, what about the now? What about the current, the status quo? So the way the youth experience climate change is not the same as those who are experiencing it 20 years ago. So we need to put the youth in the platforms where they ought to be. There's COP28 coming. Let us see the youth contributing to those platforms. I'm happy there's this also conference that is ongoing today and tomorrow. Let us use the output or the outcome from this conference to voice out. Let us write reports that will reach to the cabinet. Let us write reports that will be published. Sometimes we believe in evidence-based report. Let us not just have a meeting and then we just shelf it. Let's write it, publish it, let it be visible. Let us, cite it to say there was a conference and according to the conference output, this is what emerged and this is what can be done to help mitigate the issue of climate change from the voice of the youth. So that's what I can say for now. And I thank you for inviting me to be with you.
Thank you so very much. If we were in a giant auditorium, I swear we would hear roaring applause. Please help me thank Teboho Modisagape and Dr. Vincent Bagiwe. My name is Gaborone Kaigolanyani Kisupile. Should you need to find any one of us, you've already been told how to find us. You can spot us on LinkedIn. You can find us in the social media spaces. Don't forget to be strategic and direct with your investment. There is no way that you can not be concerned about climate change from multiple angles. So the intersections of our oppressions should be what guides us and motivates us to continue to work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katlego, for moderating that session. Tevi Modisagape and Dr. Vincent Bagiwe, thank you so much for sharing your insights and helping us appreciate the threat multiplier that climate change is. But above that, also putting forward solutions that we can look into so that we're not just disheartened by being victims of climate change. And moving swiftly along, and next we have a session that will focus on Indigenous people and climate action. As we know, Indigenous people have a large role to play and are already playing a large role when it comes to addressing climate change and being custodians of the earth, being custodians of the land that we live on, because they've been here for so much longer than us, which is why the next session will be addressing that, and it will be presented by Walekan Hakemoto Satawu. Walekan Hakemoto, I know him as Hakemoto, is the co-founder and chairman of Okavango Human Wildlife Conflict Foundation, and he is the regional executive, he's on the executive committee of the Indigenous People of Africa coordinating committee. Satau, are you in the room with us?
Yes, Katlo, I'm in the room. I hope I'm audible.
You are perfectly audible. Thank you so much for making time to join us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen present here. I recognize you, and I'm asked to speak about something that is not really easy to speak about. And a task like this, especially when I'm talking to Botswana, I often wonder if they understand who we are talking about. So that would, however, in introduction, make me to delve in to give the background of who we are talking to or talking about, so that we are able to translate on how climate change or actions or global crisis associated with climate change and how does it affect them. Who are these indigenous people to start with? I would, as a way of driving or bringing you home, there is United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People of 2007, and according to Griffiths 2018, have referred to indigenous people as that who are native or belonging naturally to a place. The Convention on Biological Diversity 2012 has its own definition from preceding UN definitions on who are indigenous, saying they are people or nations that have existed in a place in the prehistorical era, that is before pre-invasion, pre-colonial societies emerged on their territories. Well, indigenous peoples in summative are those distinct from, in short, Bantu people in Africa. And just like, or the same way as the fauna and flora, for your understanding, are indigenous unless they are extraterrestrial or external. This is according to the ILO Convention 169 and also UN DRIP. So indigenous peoples they retain their social, cultural, economic, and political characteristics that are distinct from those of the dominant societies in which we live. I now understand, I now believe and think you understand who I'm talking about, Kirgi, the indigenous people. And it is very also important for you to note that what is the national understanding of the indigenous people? Officially, the state position of indigenous people, as you may be all aware, is that all Botswana are indigenous to Botswana. Botswana, like other African countries, are not comfortable or have not acknowledged the concept of indigeneity exclusive to certain group of people. This is interesting because this is the irrespective of Botswana voting in favor of United Nations Declaration of the Indigenous People. The semantics, the political and the state position is, I don't know really have any other perceptions, but what I believe is as their position is behind the semantics, though the definition, they define in terms of who are indigenous and on what characters somebody have to be ascribed as indigenous person are clearly undisputable. And with that, it has made issues or progression into discussions of climate change, the face or in the context of indigenous people being problematic. But if you may understand, Hori, after that definition, climate change is, as you may all aware, people have been saying this, is a global crisis. And of course, we need there's a global overview of the urgency of addressing climate crisis. And even as a country, we have a country program and action on how to deal with the climate actions. And these actions, unfortunately, are in exclusion of indigenous people. This is their intrinsic connection. The intrinsic connection between indigenous peoples and environment doesn't form part of an understanding under which we can engage to improve our strategies as we adapt to climate change and come up with resilience mechanisms. Historically, indigenous peoples have existed in the southern part of the Congo Basin, and history speaks to us that there's been Jan Ben Rivek coming to Cape Town, Germans landing in the modern Walvis Bay, Bantu, various streams migration. As all the system, the migration systems, immigrated populations come into the southern part of the Congo Basin, they have one way or the other displaced, exterminated, and forcibly assimilated the indigenous populations of our land. And interesting enough, Botswana, given the position of its denial of indigeneity of its own people, referring to the Khoisan and the San, is said to be linguistically having or housing the majority variety of indigenous languages. We have more in Botswana actually than any other country in Africa. We have more San or Khoisan communities in Botswana in linguistic differences, all the way from Lobatse to Kasani to Mamuno to Muhembo. Throughout, we have one way or the other forcefully integrated or assimilated indigenous communities in our societies. Bad enough, those mainly in the southern part of Botswana have completely lost their identity and language. They identify themselves as Baliti, Bamaketsi, Bakwena, Bamwatu, and Bakata, Bahaicho. And often very few part of the central district, we still see some, and in north and northwest, where we still found, could still find our indigenous people. Bahaicho. So what are the challenges? After I have given you this background and the historic context or context of this, who are these indigenous people, for you to appreciate, because this history is really important. There are unique challenges faced by indigenous people in Botswana. There is a violation of indigenous peoples and their rights. And first, there is a systematic exclusion of whereby their identity as indigenous is still disregarded under the constitutions of Botswana, the policies of Botswana, and the state position when referring or dealing with the indigenous population. They often talk about rural marginalized communities or destitute community programs. But we are not destitute, but we are indigenous. And indeed, when talking about indigenous people, we are not talking about individual rights. We are talking about inclusive society rights of people, and the whole cosmovision, the whole understanding of biocultural and ecological protocols of people which are really meaningful in a discourse like the one we are having today. Called Basara, Bushmen, they are called Sen in various researches, and officially in Botswana they are referred to as Basara, referring to the Bugakwe, Tlanikwe, Juntswase, Dlanakwe, Zoikwe, Kaotlaishi, Chwakwe, Kong, to mention among others. So there's a lot of them in Botswana, almost about 15 Khoisan dialects we have in Botswana, though we are lagging behind in promoting the element of their indigenous identity and culture. Far less best than Namibia and South Africa, Zimbabwe and Mozambique.
Bahaito. This is despite the position of the African Commission. This is despite the position of Social Charter, that is the Maputo Protocol, after which Namibia and South Africa went ahead to identify their own indigenous people or persons. And yeah, Harare as Botswana, Bahaito, we are still lagging behind in that approach. Well, that you'll have to understand that our indigenous people, in the early 80s or late 80s, Botswana embarked in a resettlement program, which actually forcibly assimilated and integrated the indigenous populations in the mainstream society. And post-assimilation was accompanied by Tribal Land Act, land allocation frameworks. The Tribal Land Territories Act did not include indigenous land tenure system, traditional economic systems, aspects under which they could apply for land, either for conservation and or their socio-cultural economies. So the assimilation meant that indigenous people have to apply or can acquire land through agricultural practices, which is mainly the Bantu or Tswana hegemonies. And for years, for several decades, Botswana government have spent millions of pula trying to, through the assimilation process, for them to be like other Botswana, and this has literally failed. And that's why today they are still regarded as the destitute, marginalized communities, often found in the peripheries of remote settlements and communities. At some point where they have been successfully integrated and still maintain their identity, they rarely form or influence decision-making at community level. The traditional economies of indigenous peoples in Botswana have evolved into significant, what I would say that what we would rather call it's a traditional economies of indigenous populations in Botswana have literally evolved into significant contributors to the country's GDP, whereby the indigenous peoples experienced forceful evictions and their land became conservation and protected areas, where corporate business like mining sectors evolved at the demise of the indigenous people, and they have neither or nor benefited from this thriving traditional, what we could call traditional economies, which have been demodernized by Haitso. And we have been told that they are taken to civilization. You would know the famous case of the CKGR eviction, whereby the government was telling us indigenous, these people are being taken out of the bush to civilization, and 40 kilometers outside the game reserve in the bush, that is where civilization is. I therefore encourage the youth of Botswana and actors in the process of climate and its impact to go to see to Tenyutsadi and Kaudwani and see the outmath of relocation, how women are suffering, how youth are suffering. So these are the people we are having in our midst in this trying time of climate change, and would guess how are the impact, the repercussions of climate change severely impact on them when they are social, political, economically excluded. Botswana governments face a substantial burden now in administering the district program aimed at indigenous peoples, though they don't call them indigenous peoples and calling them marginalized rural communities. This situation has arisen due to deliberate disconnect between indigenous peoples and their traditional social economies, effectively fostering a dependency syndrome, as I said earlier, and additionally due to force the indigenous people's assimilation into mainstream society cultures, and their cosmovision has eroded or is no more meaningful to the significance of money that they could accrue from their nature and resource governance system. So what are the impacts of the climate change after understanding the background and the context in which we can present or we present indigenous people? There is drought, Bahait, as you are all aware. Botswana has been prone to drought recent years as a result of climate change, and there's land degradation, land grabbing, and displacement, which still continue, Bahait. Some of our indigenous communities have acquired land so far in a form of arable land or cattle farming, boreholes. And this is the land because these people cannot own livestock. This is the land where other Bantu societies, so Botswana societies, want to evict them in the name of bringing them to civilization, making them join other mainstream societies or follow development. And that is where this is the land that they are currently struggling to maintain. And there is a cohort of government departments in sabotage, and therefore they are coercing these indigenous people to move away from their land, hence they can't fully utilize it. I have examples, if the time could allow, to share. These are the issues we are experiencing in our Botswana, and sometimes when we speak about them, you would think this is not in Botswana, Bagaitso. And engaging with some indigenous persons or communities who have land, and the thing is, they are proposing that their arable land, their cattle sites, boreholes, they want to transform them into arid land, wildlife areas, whereby they want to use the waters to water livestock, wildlife instead of livestock. And this, interesting enough, they are saying this could help remove elephants from farmers' boreholes and fields. And water scarcity during the drought period shouldn't be the reason why there is an increase in human-wildlife conflict, because they fare best coexist with wildlife than any other traditional economies. But which is one of the important things as we discuss about climate change. Right now, in the areas of Chobe and Kasani, this dry season elephant or human-wildlife conflict has been in the rise. The reason being that they are coming for resources like water. And where is human occupation? It's along the delta, it's around the river run areas. That is where the cattle posts are, that is where the villages are. And animals are on the arid land because it is dry, they are coming, mainly elephants. And they're killing people, killing our breadwinners, killing people we love, and it's really pathetic. Though there's ample land outside that could be, as indigenous peoples propose, could be utilized if only their traditional economies and cultures are accepted as their ways of life. And that is an alternative that could be utilized to mitigate challenges of climate change, which eventually result in increased human-wildlife conflict. And what should I ask youth to do? Role of the youth, Bahaitso. Please, indigenous peoples, youth of Botswana, have solutions to the problems we are having, because as Botswana, like many other global countries, they are being reactive to impacts of climate change. And Bahaitso, as indigenous persons sitting here, or somebody involved into indigenous discourse, I tell you, we are not coming into climate change discussion as listeners or beggars of what could be done. We are coming up with solutions. We are bringing in solutions. At least now, the Mother Earth is now opening up that opportunity for you to engage, particularly to Bonkukwalo, that you have disregarded for so long. And now the nature is taking its course, and we are having solutions to some of the challenges of climate change, because climate change, as much as you know, has been is the work of the greed, the greed of money and power has greatly contributed to climate change, whereby the global north and west have disrupted, and now we are reaping the disruption of west and north greed for industrialization. And Baha'is indigenous peoples, the climate solutions are part of our our value systems of nature protection and conservation, whereby we present ourselves as part of nature. We live in coexistence and in peace with nature. That is our livelihood. That is where our economies are. And the challenges we are receiving here, because Botswana doesn't recognize its indigenous people, it's very difficult. Where do we start to engage on indigenous people's issues and how they could be part of the solution to our climate crisis? And as we develop programs or climate actions, recently Botswana included transport from agriculture. Transport was not agriculture and mining, energy industry sectors have been climate mitigation and climate change national focuses on how they should reduce their emission, and it has been in mining industry and agriculture. And recently there's a research commissioned to see how transport should be included into the narratives of the Botswana's climate strategy. And you could see the top-down state, the Botswana government owns the initiative, and community at large, even other Botswana, are not included, not to talk about the indigenous peoples. Botswana borrow knowledge and information from outside, literature that exists, hence it is state or it's implemented by state organs and apparatus at the exclusion of the general public and so forth. And see why the people were saying climate change is a new topic to us, and people don't understand climate change in the similar context in which climate change debates and discussions are ongoing globally. Climate change, we only know about a drought, and we can't equate drought to climate change. We think traditionally we know there should be there was locust, there was drought this year, there was too much rain and water this year. That's what an ordinary person at home understand, not in a similar context of the discussions ongoing about climate change. And I also encourage youth and let's go away from the historic subjugation, exclusion of indigenous people, and embrace with sensitivity that bonku kwalona basarwa kana babitsa basarwa. Though they've given you color, good body throughout Botswana, but and Baba Shota, Baba Bitsa Basara, and in Botswana you are all aware that so, and they would rather use taxpayers' money to go and benchmark in Australia, New Zealand, and in Canada, where indigenous rights are respected, leaving our own indigenous people with knowledge and solutions of the problems we needed to solve. Baha'is youth and support indigenous peoples to devise their own free, prior, and informed consent as a mechanism through which they could be engaged and involved in climate action. And there should be climate justice, whereby nobody is left behind. The SDG that no one should be left behind. We are a consultative government. This rhetorics and write-up shouldn't be good in paper, as many have criticized Botswana as a country or Botswana. We should not leave anybody behind. Indigenous peoples need to be included in decision making, and if possible, use the affirmative action program or policy, which already exists, to involve indigenous people in climate action, adaptation, and resilience. With those few remarks, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much for those words, Satal. Very insightful, very, very insightful. We'll go straight to the Q&A session. For anyone who's interested, we've done a podcast episode before with Satal at the Sustain 267 podcast on Indigenous people at COP27. And I have to say to you, to date, it is still one of our most, it is our most listened to episode to date. I'll also share the link in the chat a little later. We have a question here from Matla Moroko or Sato. Sipho, if you're able to switch on your video, please do. And Matla says, Indigenous people, if you know any grouping, how is their communication conducted with them as far as climate change issues are concerned and sustainable development is shared with them? Base language. Is the mode on language used sustainable in that most words are not easy to translate from English to most African lingo? Should we start with that one and then we'll take Katlaho's hand?
Do you want me to respond to that or wait for other? But if I may use time wisely, there is indigenous people, if you know any group, how is the communication conducted to them? Today, that is an interesting observation, if that was you, no matter. Well, there has been an assimilated process of consultation, whereby you use the quota system, and in the integrated society, the way the public on official language is Setswana. And because indigenous peoples cannot express themselves well in Setswana in front of any people or in the front of many people, they have not significantly contributed to general quota system consultation process or awareness creation process. These are people who have been disconnected, lower self-esteem, lower engagement, capacity of engagement, and because of the servitude attitudes presented towards them, they have little contribution to decisions that are made or responses to the consultation agendas that have been in place. And I would say, I have given some recommendations when the community-based natural resource management revision policy was done. Professor Takadu was asking me, what is the best way to engage with the indigenous communities? I said, Bahaizo, traditionally, we didn't have chiefs, Bahaizo. We had leaders, and decisions were on the basis of consensus. That is the traditional status of how indigenous peoples have engaged. Hape, I said he should use focus group discussions or around the fire cycle discussions. Traditionally, the Sen or the Khoi Sen did not speak or talk about their issues during the day. During the day, they are busy managing the environment. And in the evening around the fire cycle, that's why the fire cycle plays a significant value in the Sen, the Khoi Sen life or tradition. That's where wisdom is shared. It's the symbol of wisdom. That's where decisions are made. That's where new ideas are shared. That's where the stories are told. So, and if you are to translation of language, we have a literacy developed. NGO work across the country has developed literacy with the wide literacy of Naro, orthography developed by Kwedam in the Northwest, and they can translate. Some still could speak the language, and I know of fellows who are having some vacation trainings on the literacy, reading and writing of their own languages. And there are those resources we could utilize if you want to translate and drive home the language and the narratives of climate change. What is the other part of the question? I think I've exhausted what she said.
I think you've answered it very well. Can we please have Katlego, and then after Katlego, can we please have Kutlwano? Please try keep your questions short and succinct and to the point. We've only got 15 minutes left. Katlego?
Thank you very much, Satau. You spoke about the dispossession, and I find, Hori, the more that we keep having this state-led conversation around CBNRM, it still wants to return indigenous persons to being in the ghetto of you're only good enough in the CBNRM space and not in the greater conversation around what affects your natural resources, like the rocks around you, the riverbeds, all those sorts of things. How do we get the attention beyond, oh, we just need to count how many antelopes there are in the region.
Thanks, Katlego. Kutlwano? Kutlwano Ntwagaye?
Hello.
Please go ahead. Hi, Kutlwano. Please go ahead.
How are you? Satau, as a student in Indigenous knowledge systems, my question would be, because issues like this, when we don't take them from grassroots level, we often go reinvent the wheel over and over and just engage in discourse. To what extent do you sensitize your communities, the indigenous people, as well as communities around, about the significance of bringing in the indigenous people, as well as exploring indigenous knowledge in terms of climate change, and not just climate change, just generally driving towards the SDGs. So my question is just around, to what extent how are you involved at grassroots level of promoting the development of indigenous people in their own I could say set up, if I may use that word. Thank you.
Patlo, if I may react to those two questions.
Please go ahead.
What you will have to understand is this, yes, let me say yes, there are some resources allowing, there are some indigenous communities and indigenous organizations who have been, we do regionally engage few youth on issues of human rights, democratic governance, resource rights and stuff. Bear with me by understanding that in Botswana, there is no official discussion about indigenous people. The land still belongs to the state and the resources still belong to the state. And even if we empower people and they get to know, given the level of fragmentation of the indigenous communities or societies we have in Botswana, it's very difficult to litigate and engage or lobby on a substantial matter that would eventually result into meaningful actions that are going to rightfully impact indigenous people's life in terms of development or be included into in climate change discussion. That is what you need to understand. Our government says we are Botswana and these are rural Botswana. There's no in an approach of development whereby ethnic lines are used. So the moment, even though we engage on indigenous people's issues and our rights and what we think would work for us, the fact that we are going to say, as Basara, this is what we want, it is censored as tribalistic, and that is not the go. It's no go area for the state for political reasons, as you may all aware. You would understand recently an exercise where the police, the military way directly go into the villages and recruiting the same youth. What happened? It was suddenly politicized. Give us the criteria you are using to separate from the village and only employing the same. That political question was right, because Botswana government should not go there and do some things that are not improper. They know the people have the skills and knowledge that could improve the military and the security services. They know knowledge out of science of trade, science of food and medicine, ecological knowledge. They know literature. There's a lot of literature about it, and the government knows it, but they fail to acknowledge it in policy and law. So this political rivalry started, and they wanted to question the criteria, and the Botswana government couldn't defend it because it is doing it out of, as if they are doing it out of mercy. Yet there's been a lot of researches and recommendations of the importance of SEN development should be, for starters, their identity recognition. Call a dog a bad name and hire him. What is so indigenous without knowing on legal terms and official terms is indigenous. That is where it's supposed to start. Bagaitsu. Indigenous knowledge, indigenous wealth is wealth in itself. It's an economy on itself, Bagaitsu. So the narrative or the explanation that Botswana have been given by the system is that whoever talks about indigeneity or giving the San their rights, it's like promoting Stone Age life or people to go and live, or the San to go and live as Stone Age creatures. That is what the President Mogae said. Khama said those people who advocate for indigenous people's rights are the very people who are driving the fancy car, Range Rovers in Gaborone, in an air-conditioned house, getting their food from the supermarket. And they want the indigenous person sent to go and chase behind the kudu and kill it after 5 hours, carry the meat on his shoulder, walk 20 kilometers to feed his family. That was a Seretakayan Khama. Mogae also said if the San are not going to stop from living like Stone Age creatures, they would perish like dinosaurs. So I'm taking these two presidents, our former presidents' position to say, you see, the thinking, Botswana particularly, leaders think primitive about the San. San are not primitive. Mark my words when I said we have solutions of some of the problems we are having. Because we've been disconnected and forced to assimilate. Hence, that has resulted into the dependency syndrome. For those who doubt it, tourism is also a contributor to the GDP of Botswana. After evicting the San and paved the way for national parks, those concessions are owned by private companies who are doing tourism, hunting tourism, and photographic tourism. And as if that is not suit the San or the hunter-gatherers or the indigenous peoples, they are said, go and live and find how other Botswana are living, till crops, real livestock. You need to make friends like us, living the whole Bantu hegemony for you to be accepted as person, not as a Stone Age creature. The primitive context comes from the government. The primitive context and presentation is what they have been using as the state to lie to the general Botswana public and distort what is the potentials and realization of indigenous economies and other potentials that could help us mitigate climate change and what Botswana could benefit from as a country. It on itself will benefit Botswana as a country. Recently, Botswana government went to Australia to benchmark the fire. Yes.
Sorry,
yes.
Not to interrupt you. We just have 6 minutes left. And while you were on the point of that it could benefit the country, as we look to conclude our session, we're talking about advancing youth leadership for sustainable development in Botswana. When we talk about then youth taking leadership, you've cited the history of, the relationship between indigenous people and the environment and climate action, and also cited our historical as Botswana relationship with indigenous people. But as young people who are on the call, as we look to then lead on what will be the next chapter of development for Botswana that takes into consideration climate action, what would you say are the principles that we should apply as young people to be inclusive, to be accommodating, to extend solidarity to the indigenous people communities of Botswana, so that as we are advocating and as we are contributing to sustainable development, we're ensuring that it is sustainable development for all. So what principles would you want to see us adopt as young people, and what practical actions would you like to see from us as young people acting on climate?
We have
about 3 minutes.
But I will try to answer that respond in 30 seconds. I'm encouraging the youth to go away from the original perception of who indigenous peoples are and regard indigenous peoples as part of the solution and champion the rights of indigenous peoples in Botswana. I would also encourage the youth and actors in this process to provide resources for further information and engagement on indigenous knowledge. I would encourage research not research about the indigenous peoples, but research with indigenous peoples. I would also encourage the youth to a call of action that now, as a government of Botswana, the government of Botswana should desist from working in parallel with research. And then there will be potential for positive change. And lastly, indigenous peoples in the next few coming time, they will be developing their own biocultural protocols through an instrument they call their own free, prior, and informed consent as one of the interventions we are getting into, so that there should be a meaningful engagement to establish, or a meaningful engagement to establish or to maximize indigenous participation in decision making, into policy and strategy building, either as for climate change or indigenous people's development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satao. And thanks for closing on that note, where now we've got tools that we feel like we've got tools that we can use and adopt as we advocate for climate action. We've only got 2 minutes left, and then appreciating the people who showed up here today on time, stayed the full 4 hours with us. I'm going to try quickly wrap up so that we can catch lunch. One of the things that has come out quite clearly in today's presentations and today's deliberations is that there is a role, not only a role for all of us, not only a role for us as youth, but a role for us as youth in our different respective interests, different respective areas of expertise, from researchers. We can see your screen, April. So our role as researchers, our role as people who are involved in policy making, in advocacy, in communication, and in activism, and we should take up those roles fully, and also represent Botswana as we come together, make sure that we're representing Botswana, not just urban youth, as I am not just youth of a certain demographic, extending the platforms that we have to make sure that Botswana, making sure that we're speaking for all of us. And with that, I just want to share with you, today was day one of our sessions. If you look at your screen, they'll show you the programs for day 1 and day 2. Tomorrow, we will be looking at just transitions in Botswana. We'll be looking at ecopreneurship. We'll be looking at green jobs, opportunities to act within the regional sphere as young people in Botswana. Although in Botswana, we are still in Africa, we're still part of a global context. So looking forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. Great sessions if you're looking to maybe pivot careers or look at how you can adopt your career to accommodating climate action as we try to lead on sustainable development. With that, I just want to say a thank you to all of you who've joined us today. This would not have been possible without you. This is for us to come together, and by showing up, you have really helped us in realizing our objective of bringing young people together for climate action. Would like to thank the hosts, Global Shapers, Community, Gaborone Hub, Sustain 267, Botswana Climate Change Network, and Green Habitat. And would also like to say a special thank you to our partners, the UBWEX, which is the environmental club at the University of Botswana, branding Akusiwa for all our lovely, beautiful artwork, and Mebala Youth Studios. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Same link, same time. My name is Bato Gidisize. I've been your MC today. It's been an absolute pleasure being in conversation with you, interacting with you, and connecting with you. In the chat just now, we'll share links to our social media, and yeah, let's stay in touch.